Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
The sun was just showing its orange edge above the horizon. Wendy was already up. She was accustomed to getting up before dawn and had plenty of things to do by lunchtime. And in the village, it was impossible to live differently because the relatives were the ones who liked to go low in bed. The neighbors looked, to put it mildly, with disapproval. However, William, Wendy's husband, looked down on local Moors as he thought that these rules did not apply to him personally. On this August morning, he too resented his wife's impetuous activities. Without opening his eyes, he shouted from under the blanket, "Wendy, what kind of person are you? Thinking only of yourself." The woman parried without delay. "If I thought only of myself, you would have starved to death long ago or covered yourself with beauty from dirt." The man was not well versed in the terms that his mistress liked to flaunt, but he knew unmistakably that beneath the city lurked something terrible with fear and loathing. He was as shaken as if he had been drinking bitter for a week. So, as befitted a real man, he decided to voice a second objection to his half. "Wendy, I wonder if it gives you pleasure to frighten me and my daughter. Where did you learn such words? You live with you, and you'll learn a lot of things. What about you? What about your darling? My daughter's used to riding on my backbone. But at some point this song must end, because my patience is not infinite." The woman deftly picked up with one hand at once 4 cans and the same number of 3-liter containers. It turned out that in her other hand at the contact of glass and surrendered a nasty squeaking sound, from which William again twitched. In a burst of indignant emotion, he threw back the blanket. The man pounded his fist on his knee, hoping that it would have the desired effect on his spouse. "Wendy, are you doing this on purpose? You know what that scraping does to me. Couldn't you have prepared the damn jars last night or at least carried them one at a time?" William was outraged. It seemed to him that Wendy was deliberately getting on his nerves to bring him to a scandal. And there's nothing to make a scandal of. Total disrespect for the head of the house. With no regard for her husband's displeasure, the women took the dishes out onto the veranda and returned to the long room in which William had been fond of seclusion for some time. Wendy flopped her plump arms against her sides, and it gave the man a childish thrill. "Wendy, you have no idea how stunning you look right now, all against the backdrop of the rising sun. If you still had a paddle in your right hand, then the woman's eyes would glisten menacingly. Or hey, you Mozart of a man, I can run to the barn for a paddle if I need one. Or my daughter, she's happy to carry it. But I don't think you'll be happy with this object." William, after these words, skewed again, and his right eye even twitched. He realized that he had mentioned the paddle in vain. And to switch the conversation in more favorable directions, he decided to demonstrate his knowledge of creativity in front of his wife. "Wendy, Mozart was a composer, not an artist. You can't be so ignorant. Yeah, I don't give a damn who suffered what when painting a woman with a paddle. You jump one day, you take me out, and I'll turn you in." Though from the lips of his wife, more than once sounded such threats, the man couldn't get used to them. The fact is that William had from birth a very fine mental tuning, and he tried to get through to the consciousness of his beloved Wendy. "I don't know why I've earned such deep disrespect from you. I'm your legal spouse, and where are you going to put me if I'm not a bad person?" Wendy sighed. "You, William, without the law. Normal husbands at least do something useful at home, and you are a bum all day long, stinking with excess of feelings." The woman exclaimed and told me, "Mama Wendy, don't marry that guy." I didn't listen to her. I believed in love. And now I pray. You're William, like a parasite sucking on my body. The man's patience broke, and he jumped up from the sail of the long sofa. "Wendy, there's a limit to everything. You're crossing every line by insulting me." Replying to Wendy in the same tone of voice that she had been carrying on the conversation with him, William simply could not. In the first place, because he has a delicate mental organization, and secondly, if Wendy got angry enough, something heavy might fly. Woman smirked, "Parasite. FYI, is not a swear word. It's just an underdeveloped creature that can't do anything. Sounds exactly like your portrait to me, William. You've been a leech on me for 22 years, and you're not coming off. Wendy went proudly to the veranda, and William could not find his composure after such unfair insults to his wife. But he wasn't going to give up, so he pulled on a tank top for the house and followed his wife. Wendy, let's talk like civilized people for once in our lives. The man became so emotional that his pathologically thin legs began to twitch spontaneously. Wendy laughed. William, don't be ridiculous. Why are you kicking around like a horse? If you have to go to the bathroom, run to the bathroom, or you'll have an accident. Wendy was making fun of him. Not the first day. It's not the first day. Not for years. Every Monday, William swore to himself that he'd be different. He'd have everything remodeled, so that he'd be a new man. Not even Wendy. But the urge passed quickly. All that was left was laziness. And William calmly postponed his makeover until the following Monday. By the law of the genre, it was up to William to say the next line. But the appearance behind William's back radically changed the mise-en-scene. The girl wiped her eyes with the back of her palm and stared at the ancient walkers seen on the wall. Oh my God, what are parents really talking about? Shouting at such an early hour, while the head of the family scratched the back of his head and thought about how to respond to a fair comment from his daughter, Wendy with a sneer said, I'm another family of parasites, raised his voice all over the field like a clone. Father and daughter exchanged a glance that did not escape Wendy's attention. She was shoving the cucumbers into the jars with exasperation, but this process was automatic because all her attention was focused on the troublemaker. Daughter, at your age, you should know that a normal woman who cares about the welfare of her family should get up early. And you shouldn't take an example from your father, who's about to get ulcers on his flanks. William didn't let her mother finish. She in one leap overcame the distance between her and her mother and hung on her mother's neck. Darling, don't start the morning with a scandal. I understood your hint, and I'm ready to always be equal to you. To say what at this minute I can help you. Wendy threw into the basin 2 cucumbers, which did not fit into the jar. You scumbag, Lisa, you know how to get on my pain in the ass. Well, if it's asking for it, there's a job for you. Only first tidy yourself, bring obeyed, and obeyed the girl smacked, but break in the cheek and ran to dress. Wendy looked sadly at her husband. Our daughter has grown up, and you and I have not noticed. William caught the change in his wife's mood. He immediately decided to take advantage of the temporary truce to consolidate it. This, Wendy, is the law of life. We get older, the kids get older, so it's time for you to change your tactics. Your commands aren't working anymore, and it's embarrassing. After all, except for me, you have no one closer, and you all wagering, all on me. The woman looked fondly at her husband. What could she take from him? She knew very well what an underdog he was. But love is evil. All right, William, I'll give you credit for sucking up. I'll try not to push you. Now, do me a favor. Put the water tank on the gas. The man rushed to do the job, but in the excitement of labor, he didn't fit in. He poked at the doorway and began to rub his bruised, long forehead vigorously. A woman came in and burst out laughing. No, this is overkill after all. Underdogs come in many varieties, but her husband outdid them all. Why are you so clumsy? Run to the refrigerator. They put it in the freezer or you'll get a black eye. I don't want the neighbors to think I'm being abusive. Cursing the narrow doors and his fate, the man rushed into the kitchen. A few seconds later, a sound came from there, from which it was easy to tell that the freezer had also given the owner of the house an unpleasant surprise. Wendy shook her head. God, at least they put a personal nanny on the man. He can't do anything human. He's liable to make himself an invalid. Then it's the end of the line. The mistress quickly told the jars and removed yesterday's harvest of cucumbers and appreciated her work with pleasure. Well, now it's all in order. It remains to make the brine as loud as possible. The woman shouted to Lisa, I need your help. Get the salt and vinegar. From the back of the house, there came the sound of Mom's now, and in less than a minute, William appeared on the veranda with a packet of salt in his hands. Wendy's cheerful mood instantly vanished. "What have you got on your mind?" Wendy looked at her daughter with the same look she had recently given her father. Lisa was surprised. "Salt, like you asked. It's extra. Pickles need regular coarse salt. Didn't you know that?" William was not confused. "Imagine, Mom didn't know. I don't can cucumbers and tomatoes every day. And I've hated all kinds of vegetables and jam since I was a kid." Wendy even turned pale with surprise. Her eyes narrowed unkindly. "But now she's gonna get it from Daddy's little girl, too. Oh, now you're talking, are you? Got a taste of city life. But that's okay. I'll bring you back to your senses in no time. As soon as I see your rations, you'll love pickles and cottage cheese." Lisa realized she had gone too far. She pouted capriciously and snuggled up to her mother's shoulder. The girl looked like a sly fox. "Mommy, you've got it all wrong. And I'm not refusing to help you, but I can't keep everything in one head at once. I have to memorize so much information a day at work that by evening I forget my own name. And you're talking to me about salt." The head of the household came from around the corner. "It's true, Harry, you're on the girl's ass early in the morning. You want me to go to the store and get some salt. Give me the money. I'll be right back." Wendy gave her husband a scornful look. "Just in case, let the goat in the garden. William, you and money are incompatible. And the stores still close. Let Lisa go to her grandmother. She always has salt and sugar in stock." The girl raised her eyebrows in surprise. "Why, Mom?" Her mother looked at her daughter condescendingly. "You are certainly not of this world. It seems that all your life lived in the royal palace. It's good for the soil. It's also used to control various plant pests. William is more confident now. In short, the daughter goodness is transferred to one known substance." William knew that now the parents would again clash in a verbal duel, but did not wait for this moment. Going to the woman at the wall was a convenient excuse to get away from home for a while. Although she disliked her father's mother, but in the current situation it was better to meet with a harmful babushka than to listen to the scolding of her parents. Although the village was fundamentally no different from 1,000 similar settlements, a few peculiarities that gave color to this place could still be distinguished. The first peculiarity was strong family traditions. This meant that all significant events were celebrated here in a big way, and the number of invitees sometimes reached up to 100 people, if not more. By the way, according to the last census, the population of the village was almost 2,000 people, which even by modern standards corresponded to a large settlement. And if to the bulk of the residents to add their urban relatives, you can imagine the scale of weddings, anniversaries, which were regularly celebrated here. Therefore, the catering facility continued to operate successfully in the village. During the day, it functioned as a regular canteen, and in the evening it was used to celebrate a significant event. Local youth also liked to gather in the cozy hall, where you could have a good time without parental supervision. The second village peculiarity was a consequence of the first. Each new generation simply had to memorize these very traditions in order to pass this heritage on to their scumbags. Personal likes or dislikes were not taken into account in this very situation after marriage. It turned out that Wendy, a girl madly in love with the local accordion player, William never once thought about what kind of relationship she would have with her mother-in-law. Wendy Kelly's mother more than once warned her daughter, "Wendy, you can't go with your feelings. William is not what you think he is. He's weak and weak. A husband like that will be hard to live with. But his mother's a real hellcat." There was nothing superfluous in the characterization that the elementary school teacher gave to the future relative. On the contrary, to this description it was possible to add many more remarkable features that possessed the main scandalist of the village. After all, the nursery was feared not only by adults, it frightened naughty children, for example. And you'd often hear that if you didn't eat all the porridge, Molly will come and take you away for re-education. The name Molly was given to the old woman long after she arrived in the village. Then Molly distinguished herself by calling all the inhabitants of this wonderful place with the capacious word Kelly to her husband, who decided to wait out the hard times in her homeland. She said, "Where did you bring me? There's only Kelly here who's studying. Not a single normal face." Since then, the villagers have held a grudge against the wife of the new collective farm chairman. However, he soon disappeared from the family nest with his mistress, leaving behind his wife and young son. But the villagers did not pity the abandoned and took the side of the traitor. Any man would run away from such a beast. Not only does she consider herself superior to others, but she calls everyone names. To this conclusion, someone added a succinct, "Molly. She is Molly." So carelessly thrown against the wall, and the word stuck to her. And William became known as Kelly's son. The boy was very shy and took the offensive nickname with shame. Many times he tried to reason with his mother. "Mom, you shouldn't swear. I'm not fighting with the neighbors. If you don't care about your own reputation, think of me." Molly didn't recognize anyone's opinion, so her son's request was like a red rag on a bull. "It's not for you to tell me what's wrong. Your daddy ran off and dumped everything on me. I've been working my ass off. I'm trying to make things right for you. And instead of gratitude, I get complaints." Indeed, her mother spared nothing for William. True, the high maternal love she showed not so much for the sake of sincere care for her son, but in order to rub the neighbors' noses in it. After all, no one in the village wanted to communicate with her. Even the nearest neighbors avoided her. If they happened to meet on the same road to visit her house, no one visited them either. Even William's school buddies categorically refused such offers. The boy was very worried about this, and his mother calmed him down. "Nothing, William. We'll get through this. I'll show them all who I am. Let them choke on their envy. I'll dance on their graves one day." The boy shuddered as he pictured this horrifying scene, but said nothing to the mother on the wall was one of those women who do not throw words to the wind. She began to slowly put her plan into action. William's mother worked at the very same catering establishment that had a dual purpose because there was always a lot of food waste. She decided to use them for her own good. "Mommy, why did you take them? Who will look after this animal?" The woman with a nonchalant look answered, "How we will take care of them. We'll see how it goes. Then we can have a pig for a uterus." Things went well, but most of the work fell on William's shoulders, and the boy couldn't wait till he graduated. Things got worse when his mother bought a cow. "William, look what a beauty I've brought. Now we'll have fresh milk and sour cream." Although the son did not share his mother's joy, he had to accept the cow. The boy's life became unbearable, and his mother treated him like a hired laborer. "William, you cook for the winter, hay for the little ones, buy you a moped." And he'd jump up early in the morning to do his mother's errands. After all, riding around the village on a moped was the dream of every teenager at that time. Very soon, William replaced the moped with a real motorcycle, and later he got a car. Having a personal vehicle increased William's self-esteem. The attitude towards him in the village changed drastically too. Now he did not lower his eyes to the ground, but walked with his head held high, listening to the admiring comments of his fellow villagers. "Look how the boy has changed. It's the life-giving power. The power of money. You might say he's the best at what he does." William also firmly believed in the power of money and began to treat mother with more reverence. In the fall, I enjoyed the care of her son, and she generously paid for this pleasure. It would seem that all acute issues in the family were eliminated. It remained only to decide on the choice of profession. William knew that his mother in her dreams sees him as a zoo technician, but he could not change his own childhood dream. After all, even at school, the boy brightly showed himself different talents. He sang well and tap danced dashingly. Kelly noticed the gifted boy in elementary school and always nominated him for the role of the host of school events. William perfectly coped with the most difficult text, for which he was recognized by the entire teaching staff. "Med will go far. Such a talent. He should be in good hands." One day, a whole delegation from the Regional School of Culture came to their school. Kelly decided not to miss such an opportunity. She showed the boy to the people who knew him. At the request of the teacher, William unashamedly demonstrated his skills in singing and dancing. The visitors were delighted and applauded the young nugget for a long time. When the applause died down, one important uncle asked his boy, "What would you like to be in the future?" William felt his importance because no one had ever talked to him on such important topics before. And his mother kept waving him away. "You don't understand anything about life yet. It will be as I say." And William had a dream of his own, because the man who asked the question inspired confidence. The boy blurted out, "I want to play the flute." The man raised an eyebrow in surprise and approvingly noted a good wish. "Let your father have you for now. And when you grow up, come to us." The soul feast was over before it had really begun. William lowered his eyes in shame. "My dad left me and my mom and took the harmonica with him." It was said with such intonation that the representative of the school could not understand what upset the child more: the departure of the father from the family or the disappearance of the musical instrument. Kelly was present during this conversation. She felt sorry for the boy to the core and invited him to visit. William was ready to cry, partly because no one had ever invited him to her home before. He broke the news to his mother. "I was invited to my house by our teacher on the wall." Molly looked at her son sidelong. "Well, go. Maybe they'll give you something tasty to eat. But don't stay there too long." That same evening, William went to visit. Kelly welcomed him warmly and introduced him to her daughter. Wendy made a lasting impression on the boy. The girl was not only good-looking, but she knew a lot of interesting stories about travelers and different animals. Despite the fact that she was 2 years younger than William, her knowledge exceeded the boy's horizons. After a hearty dinner that Kelly had prepared, the children marveled in the tick room, and William forgot about the existence of time. He arrived home later than his mother's appointed hour, for which he received a scolding from her. "What time did I tell you to be home?" William habitually lowered his eyes and with a tremor in his voice fed back to his family. "But I didn't notice." His mother raised her voice and even took a swing at him, something she had never allowed herself before. "Would you remember what I'm telling you? You'll stay home for a week. No going out, no visitors." During that time, just to subtract the pigs was the cruelest punishment. But William had no idea that his mother would go even further. The next day during the big break, he saw his parents talking to Kelly, as the woman was actively gesticulating with her hands. The kid realized that he should not expect anything good from this visit. From a bad-feeling William, all inside went cold, and he even hid under the stairs so that his mother would not find him. He stayed in this hiding place until the end of school, but he was still unable to escape home unnoticed. In the vestibule, he was detained by the teacher, said calmly, "William, skipping classes without a good reason is not good. By the way, your mom came to school today. She complained that you don't help her around the house." The boy was filled with indignation, and he shouted, "I help her by cleaning up after the pigs. If you knew how much I hate them." 2 large tears rolled down his tanned cheeks in peace. The teacher didn't hold back. She drew the boy to her. "William, you can't do that. It's not the animal's fault that your mom makes you do hard work, is it? You realize it's very hard on her alone, so she can be a little hard sometimes. We try not to argue with her as much as we can. Help." An unpleasant thought ran through William's mind. All adults for one. Here's Kelly running over to my mom's side. He wanted to think about something important, but he didn't have time, because the teacher said with a smile on her face, "Wendy was asking about you. You can come visit us anytime if your mom will let you." Only a few days later, William learned from casual witnesses that his mother had come upon the world Kelly. She reproached the teacher for leading other people's children astray. Despite the fact that he had always felt awe before his mother, the desire to restore justice was stronger. That's when he had his first confrontation with Kelly Wall. "Mom hurt the teacher for some reason. She's the kindest and she's nice to me. She has a cool daughter. She wants to be friends with me because I have no friends at all. He looked at his mother in an adult way, and for the first time she couldn't take it. Her imperious tone suddenly changed to a mumbling tone. "And you were his voice. Do I mind your teacher? Not at all. You can be friends with a bald devil, but only without harming the house." Thus was won the first victory over his crazy mother. William won his second victory by enrolling in a cultural school. Mother had to accept this fact. He returned to his native village after 3 years, a well-trained worker of the cultural front, and was immediately appointed director of the club. After this reinforcement, Molly became a very prominent figure in the village, and neighbors began to greet her. Even Miranda, who was considered the main troublemaker, now with respect, was paying her back. "Good day to you, Molly. How is William feeling in his new position?" Though such questions were like a balm to the heart, the woman answered them without her former arrogance, but with dignity. "He has already settled in. He wants to create a team. He was promised new instruments in the region." Miranda's little eyes sparkled. "An instrument is good, of course, but a good bride is even better." Miranda giggled, and Molly felt her heart seize up frantically in her chest. Just the thought of anyone daring to take her son away from her. It was panic-inducing. Forgetting her manners, the woman began to question the gossip with relish. "Miranda, if you know something, spill it nicely." Miranda's eyes went wide. "Oh, you don't know that your William is head over heels in love with the teacher's daughter." Her ears flinched because she had expected to hear a better argument. Surprised the hedgehog in one place. "I thought you knew something I didn't." "It's the little things. William has been friends with Wendy since childhood, but my son is not thinking about getting married." Miranda made unthinkable eye movements again. "That's what you think. Young people these days love surprises. I once saw them kissing sweetly in the meadow by the river. Maybe they've already given you a grandchild, and you have no idea." Miranda was triumphant. Molly stood in the middle of the street at a loss. An inner voice insistently told her that William was a grown man, and you could not hold him by force. So accept the future fate of your mother-in-law. But Molly was not accustomed to surrender without a fight. She decided in advance that she would arrange a fun life for her future daughter-in-law. The woman knew perfectly well that the son easily falls under any influence, so she decided to preempt the actions of the enemy and to search for a convenient bride. Of course, Wendy herself did not suspect the secret plans of William's mother. She was finishing her studies at the veterinary school and came home only on holidays and vacations. Kelly was raising her daughter alone, and she didn't have extra money for Wendy's weekly trips. The girl learned all the news from her mother during long-distance conversations. One day, Wendy asked how William was doing. "He's visiting you." The question took the woman by surprise, and she answered with feigned cheerfulness. "Yes, I'm busy at work all the time, and William has no free time. Our villagers tell us he's going to start an orchestra. It's all about the instruments." Wendy realized that her mother was trying to avoid a direct answer. She didn't bother her with questions and quickly said goodbye. The girl came to the village for the weekend to see if the rumors that had reached her were true. And if you believe the rumors, her beau was not bored and even found a replacement for her. So the first thing she did was not go to school, to please her mother with her arrival, and went to the club. In the hearth of rural culture was in full swing rehearsal. Local talents, mostly unmarried girls, selflessly sang, and the young director of the club inspiredly played the accordion. There seemed to be nothing objectionable in the picture. But on the throwing of the eyes, Wendy immediately figured out the rival. She turned out to be Miranda's daughter, a former classmate. For this girl is firmly entrenched unkind word student. According to unconfirmed information, that C was not squeamish married men. And one day, one of the cheating wives gave her a dark one. People said that the woman so withdrew Love Maiden that she did not show on the street for a month. This story was then tried to be hushed up. The victim's mother told everyone that her daughter was attacked by hooligans. "You can't imagine, kind people, what these freaks did to my daughter. Not only did they take my purse and earrings, they broke my nose." Sympathizers asked a fair question. Why didn't they report the attack to the police? Miranda was confused and said the wrong thing. So he was on vacation, and when he came back, it was too late to look for the bandit. But the villagers, especially the women, understood perfectly well why Miranda didn't want to make a fuss. Later, the whole truth came out, but the daughter and her mother were not embarrassed by this fact. But it seems that Adriana did not learn her lesson well, and once again began to hunt for other people's husbands and fiancés. That's what Wendy thought, watching the rehearsals from a niche at the very end of the auditorium, which was not visible from the stage. The amateur group performed several famous songs under the accordion, and William thanked the girls. "Thank you all. The next rehearsal is on Friday." The girls rushed to the exit. Only Miranda remained on stage. The girl had a cheeky smile on her face and headed for the principal. "William, I don't remember my part very well. Maybe you can work with me individually." The young man was surprised at the tone. "I didn't notice any faults in your performance. You sing exactly according to the notes, and that's why." That is, she took another step and walked straight into the director. In a languid voice, she said, "William, if I can do everything without a hitch, why don't you make me a soloist?" While the young man thought about what to say, she threw her arms around his shoulders. Wendy could no longer calmly watch the insolent damsel make an attempt on her fiancé. She resolutely came out of hiding and headed toward the stage. "Is this how you rehearse?" William threw down his arms with longing. "Wendy, when did you get here?" "Right off the train and straight here." Wendy walked onto the stage, leaving her rival with an appraising stare. "Adriana, what are you batting your eyes at? Go under the bench." Such treatment angered the unformed soloist, and she, with her usual impudence, declared, "And who are you to tell me what to do? By the way, the club is a public place, and anyone can come here. A person can, but you can't." "Why is that?" Adriana stared at William, but he hurriedly averted his eyes. Wendy realized that she had the last word. "So the whole point is that you don't fit the definition of a human, by all accounts. And this animal feeds on carrion." Adriana, eyes bulging. "William, tell me, have you at least a word?" Young man has already fully come to normal and tried without prejudice to divorce the warring parties. "Girls, there's no need to quarrel. Adriana, I'll see you on Friday. And about the soliloquy, I'll have to think about it." Although there were no witnesses to the fight at the club, the whole village knew about it in great detail by evening. Kelly read Wendy's daughter. A self-respecting girl should be above such squabbles. "Frankly, I didn't expect you to be so outrageous. You're imposing on William." Wendy was not even offended at her mother and reasonably noted, "Mommy, you measure everything by outdated standards. It's a different time, and you have to fight for your happiness." The always poised Kelly lost her temper this time. "And you think William is worth fighting for? He's neither fish nor flesh." "A little bit. Is that what he is? You'll be lost with him because he can't stand up for himself, let alone his family. So be it. I like him just the way he is." Kelly knew it was pointless to change her daughter's mind, but she still hoped there would be another girl. Besides Adriana, those terms that would fascinate William. The solution, the exact same problem William's mother was battling. Since the number 107 did not transpire, she was feverishly searching for a replacement for her candidacy, and time was working against her. Complicating matters was the fact that after Antonina was rudely knocked off, Wendy Miranda stopped noticing Autumn trying to establish a relationship with her. William's mother was the first to make a move toward reconciliation. She showed up at the lost Miranda's house herself. "Are you blowing on me? I don't even know who I am." That Wendy just drove in from somewhere and showed up out of the blue. The woman spoke so sincerely that Miranda believed her. "Are you telling the truth? You didn't build this. Shame on me. I got baptized." "God be with you. How could I do such a thing? What do you want?" "I swear, on my cow." Miranda laughed heartily. "Amazing things are happening. I never thought a cow could be more valuable than a person. Usually you swear on your mom or someone else in the family, and you're offering your cow. I'm surprised. The relationship between the buddies had matured. Together, they began to devise a plan to neutralize the unwanted bride. But their devious schemes were not to come to fruition. Because William and Wendy filed an application, they decided not to inform their mothers about it, so that there would be no unforeseen circumstances. William was the one who was most worried about it. Wendy, I think we'd better not wake the beast. I mean my mother. You know what she's capable of. So say on the eve of the wedding, and I don't think we need to make a big show of it for the whole village. Why waste money? We'll need it ourselves. William hadn't expected such a turn, but he was delighted with the woman he'd chosen. Wendy, you're a unique girl. Everyone dreams of a wedding, a big dress, and all the trimmings. But you don't. The girl flicked the groom on the nose. William, I'm just rational. The date of the painting was approaching, and the young had to reveal their secret. Kelly took this news not that with joy, but tolerable. But Molly didn't even shy away from her sister-in-law. She walked in without a whimper. Oh, what on earth is going on? Mother's the last to know he's getting married. Do I deserve to be treated like this? Or do you value a pebble more than your mother? William tried to calm his mother, who continued to rebuke him. What am I going to do alone nowadays? Dashenka. Wendy was tired of these wailing, and she decided to say her weighty word. We will help you, albeit not with hope. She looked at the girl. You will. I always keep my promises. Then Wendy did not realize that she was signing her own verdict. The future mother-in-law, having broken her promise to her, was not appeased. She wanted to talk to the wedding party face to face, too. In the evening of the same day, she, bringing with her a bottle on olives of her own making, came to visit Kelly when receiving guests. In the olden days, it was customary to give the bride a viewing, and I'm honoring the traditions of my ancestors, so to speak. Wendy's mother cordially invited the future relative into the house. Come by the wall, Molly. I'm all for observing customs, too. Then that's where we'll start. The guest went into the kitchen and put a pour on the table. What's this for conversation? The woman sat down on the hostess's table, making it clear that the deciding vote was hers. Kelly did not object to this order. I'm ready to hear you out, not Molly. And my intuition tells me that you intend to talk about the fate of our children. The guest spat the palm of her hand on the capital. Exactly. And I'll tell you right away, dear world, Kelly, that I'm dissatisfied with what? Everything. First of all, I don't like the fact that there's not going to be a wedding. Just think what people will say about us. Wendy's mother chuckled. They'll probably say we're stingy, sparing money. In the fall, Molly came to life. That's right. That's what I mean. Of course, your salary is low and you can't afford much. The landlady interrupted her guest. Why do you draw such conclusions? We live quite normally, not worse than others. The guest snidely remarked, and what kind of dowry will you give? A washing machine or a vacuum cleaner? Kelly shrugged her shoulders. What's wrong with household appliances? I think every family needs such appliances. William's mother stretched out on a chair, her face dreaming and her tongue loose from the olives she had drunk. So she decided to come clean. And me to you, honored one. You're a teacher, but you don't understand anything about life. Today, everything is decided by money. Without it, you can't go anywhere. The guest reached for the bottle, but Kelly covered her glass with her palm. Thank you. That's enough for me. What's your pleasure? I'll have some more. Don't think I'm into this stuff. No, God forbid. And my husband was a non-drinker, a very decent man. Then why did he leave you and your son? Who knows? He was always missing something. He said I looked like a soldier. All I had of a woman was my looks. So he ran after women who didn't live up to him. Well, that's in the past. And now I care about the fate of my only son. He's used to getting everything without refusal. I bought him a motorcycle for years and then a car. And recently I gave him a German accordion. You have no idea how much such an instrument costs. In the region they promised to give him a good accordion. But they brought such junk. So I bought him a present. In the fall, Molly took in more air, as if preparing to jump into the water. Of course, a wedding is a special event, so the gift should be special. I've been thinking and thinking for a long time, and I've come to the conclusion that you and I should give the children a house. Kelly, ouch, that's a surprise. Unfortunately, it's beyond me. I don't have the means. The guest rejoiced. I didn't expect any other answer from you. You intellectuals, not accustomed to labor, and I all my conscious life back, and do not develop. And all for the sake of my only son. I've kept piglets and cows in the compartment. That's why I have money. Kelly got suspicious. What are you trying to say? That even though you are a teacher, but in fact you are a shill, which behind your soul you have nothing. The hostess began to lose her nerve. She wanted to just take and throw this smug fool out the door. But her upbringing did not allow her to stoop to such an act. Kelly very politely but firmly said, Molly, living room. I understand what you wanted to tell me. My daughter and I are not trying to infiltrate your family and do not claim your money. In principle, I am absolutely indifferent to what you give your children for the wedding. I don't think we should interfere with them. Let them decide for themselves whether love or money is more important to them. William's mother realized that the conversation was over. She rose reluctantly from her chair and took the half-empty bottle of tincture from the table. Without saying goodbye to the hostess, the guests left. Kelly still for a long time recollected in her memory separate moments of the conversation. She decided not to tell her daughter about the visit of her future mother-in-law. A few days later, the young couple married. The event was celebrated in the village canteen, which on holidays worked as a restaurant. Despite the narrow circle of invited gifts, there were many. Kelly gave the newlyweds a modern washing machine, which soothed the laundry itself. William's mother handed over a set of bed linens and a set of knives. The guests were outraged by such an act because village people believed in omens and knew that a knife is a symbol of disease and trouble. Therefore, such items should not be given to loved ones. From the stories of Lisa's mother, knew they were already in the character of Kelly's grandmother. Of course, Wendy was silent about many things. For example, she did not tell her daughter about how her grandmother made a conspiracy on her. Nor did she talk about the little tricks like chicken feathers and needles that her mother-in-law had slipped into hidden places during her visits while Kelly was alive. Wendy still tried to influence her husband's mother. She helped her around the house and once rescued a cow. Then the poisonous pincers of guilt set in. But instead of gratitude, the daughter-in-law was always reprimanded with a caustic remark. Wendy, don't try to sound smarter than you are. But I did. So what? Drumming now. That's no mean feat. I could have handled it myself. What angered the mother-in-law most of all was the fact that it was not her, but Wendy who was respected in the village as a human being and a high-class professional. After all, it was her daughter-in-law who had become a certified animal technician, not her son William. It was only a few years that he held the position of club director, and then he burned out like a light bulb. The result of such a negligent attitude to work was the disintegration of the team, which he had worked so hard to assemble. Several times the man was summoned to the regional department, begging him to come to his senses. But William also spit on all entreaties from a bird's eye view. When his wife asked him, "What are you going to do now? How are you going to make a living?" he answered for me with enthusiasm, "Don't worry, I won't become an idler. I'm gonna play at weddings. Believe me, there are so many clients that you can run, really." At first, the accordionist was in high demand. But then he was invited less and less often, and he was forced under pressure from his wife to get a job at the post office as a driver. A new director was never sent to the club. Therefore, a huge barn lock was hung on the door of the cultural establishment. Later, a businessman with a strange surname bought the ruined building. Michael was a visiting bird, and from the way he spoke, you could sense that he had a rich past. His appearance in the village caused quite a stir. He drove up in a shiny black car and stuck his head out the window. Asked him how's life here. Aborigin's unfamiliar word confused the old men who happened to witness Misha's appearance to the people of the Earls. Only one old man swung his cane at the businessman's car and shouted, "You, that word, go back to where you came from. We don't need pans and other nobles here. We have enough of our own." He laughed heartily and drove on, and the witnesses scattered in different directions to warn the neighbors about the arrival of a suspicious type in the village. Kelly was one of them. And Kelly was the first to tell, and bald men go everywhere. Finishing her eyes by habit, she stunned her friend from the threshold. "Oh, what's going on? Definitely soon will be the end of the world." Molly indifferently asked, "Well, and what happened there again?" "A real oligarch. He just came to us, said that he would live here. He's living on his own. What do we care about him?" "Ask," she said indignantly, as if this man had the appearance of a criminal and chains on him. Miranda showed her hands and the magnitude of the gold jewelry. However, it was on Kelly's wall, but her story made absolutely no impression. But when the same Miranda already on the second day said, "Remember, I told you yesterday about the oligarch. Well, he's already bought our club. He wants to open a store there. And he also has a grudge against the farm. He wants it to come there too." At half a word, Miranda froze, and then smiled radiantly. "By the way, he buys milk from private people, and his price is great, so keep it in mind." The bear thanked Miranda for the useful information, and on her tip went to establish contact with the new villager. Of course, the mother-in-law didn't think it necessary to warn her daughter-in-law, who was responsible for collecting milk from private people, about her decision. When Wendy learned of her husband's mother's latest antics, she became furious. She decided to tell her mother-in-law to her face all that she had boiled up in her soul. For many years of coexistence, Molly did not expect the arrival of the daughter-in-law, and at the first minute was confused. "Wendy 3 myself." From the threshold began Wendy, although she tried to be extremely polite. Her voice rang against Molly's wall. "I can't understand what you're trying to accomplish. Instead of helping me in any way, you're always giving me a hard time. What's there to help you with? You're so proud and independent." "Yes, I am. But your son needs care. He can't do anything, and I'm sick of babysitting him." My mother-in-law was triumphant. "Now you're singing. I remember when you used to keep William in the dark. If he'd married Adriana, he'd have had a different life. You'll tell me it's my fault you raised a lazy son. I'd have kicked him out the next day. Because a lazy brow like your son only gets in the way in the house." The women were arguing, and Lisa watched their faces, for such scenes happened very often before her eyes. She was used to them. William, too, was a bystander, as he put it, to the ladies' squabbles. He was careful to remain neutral. He enjoyed being the object of the two women's long-running argument. Winking at his daughter, he often said while Grandma and Mom are fighting, "My daughter will be like cheese and butter if they become friends. Then, daughter, your daddy's going to die." Since in the interests of the man was to heat up the hearth of the conflict, he asked his daughter to inform her mother on grandmother. The fault of the latter was that she all the milk from another village gives the oligarch. The girl was puzzled by such an assignment from her father. "Daddy, but it's not good to denounce relatives. Grandma might be offended by you. She doesn't know anything. And it's not snitching, it's a noble deed. Why don't you tell her yourself?" "I can't. You see what's going on here. We don't need to turn this conflict into a hot one. You're gonna tell your mom in confidence." Lisa did everything according to her father's instructions, but she didn't expect Wendy to react to the news. A storm of the most negative emotions. For probably an hour her mother scolded her grandmother with different words. She called her an adventurer and an old marismatic. There sounded words and worse, but the girl realized that her grandmother should not pass them on. She decided not to tell Kelly anything at all. After that incident, relations between the daughter-in-law and mother-in-law spoiled definitively. In the fall, Molly stopped visiting them, but through her granddaughter she was aware of family events. One day William caught her grandmother in tears. "The girl is not on a joke," scared Grandma. "What's wrong with you? Are you sick?" Shouldn't you call a doctor? Molly waved her away. A doctor won't help. Wendy's right. I'm the last one. I got ditched by that alligator. The girl recoiled in fright. Have you seen a crocodile? Where Molly grinned sadly. He's taken up residence here. And that bald guy who bought the house by the store. That's him. So he's an oligarch. I don't care. They're both dangerous animals. Did that Aurelian really fight with you? The old woman began to lose patience with her granddaughter's endless questions. What makes you think he fought? But you yourself said that he threw you. My girl, that bad man screwed me for money. I gave him all the milk from another village for 3 months. I denied myself, and he didn't pay me a penny. He told me all about it later. And yesterday he said that my milk was of poor quality, and he scrapped it all. So he won't pay anything for such goods. Now I'm sitting like an old woman at a broken trough and don't know what to do. William grew up a sympathetic child, and I really wanted to help my grandmother. Grandma should tell the police. Let that bald guy go to jail. Let Kelly hold the girl close to her. What don't you realize? There's nothing you can do to get rid of that ghoul. And the precinct won't help. You do this. Tell the moms to come to me from the farm for milk. The girl told Wendy almost verbatim the whole conversation. The woman looked fondly at her daughter. Lisa, you're like a carrier pigeon. Tell your favorite Kelly that tomorrow they'll come to see her, and I'll put her on the list. We've warned everyone in the village not to trust such rascals. Wendy turned to her husband. You know, William, that man tried to take over our farm too, but he's had a setback. William was trying to fix an electric kettle. What's the trick? Wendy looked affectionately at her husband. You've got a short memory, like a girl on the run. I've already told you that our farm is a community farm. To sell it, we need the consent of all the shareholders. William thoughtfully fiddled with the teapot. I think you're celebrating your victory early. Men like Michael can break anyone. All you have to do is put a lot of money up against them. Rarely a man can resist. Time has proven both mother and father right. No matter how hard Michael tried, he failed to get hold of the farm, which was making a good profit. But one of the shareholders bought the business. The new owner began by tightening discipline at the farm, and at the same time cut the wages of the employees. The unpleasant changes took place just before Lisa arrived. Wendy experienced these changes hard and was in a bad mood. So William did not dare to talk to her about a subject that was very important to her. But since she was so excited and eager to tell someone about the upcoming changes in her personal life, she decided to share her secret with her grandmother. And going for salt was a convenient excuse to leave the house for a while. The girl's face reflected her overflowing emotions because Molly immediately asked her, "Why did you come so early?" "My mom sent me to get salt. She rolls cucumbers, and there was no coarse salt at home." The old woman muttered unhappily that a good housewife should always have a supply of matches and salt in the house. Lisa spoke up in her mother's defense. "We have extra, and we haven't used matches for a long time because we have a special lighter. Not the territory. What are you doing standing on the doorstep? Come in. I'll put the kettle on. I can see from you that you haven't had breakfast yet." The girl took off her shoes and tiptoed into the big room. She knew that her grandmother liked cleanliness and order, so she tried not to disturb this harmony. "Come to the kitchen. We'll have breakfast here. There's no need to make a mess in the hall." Lisa obediently obeyed this order. The kitchen was already flooded with sunlight, which shone through the stylish curtains. Along the wall, Molly quickly set the table and put 2 cups of UI, hot or a little cooler. "Grandma, you know I don't like boiling water. People's tastes change. Maybe that's what changed in the city. How would I know? You don't come much anymore." The last remark was said with an obvious reproach, and Lisa felt her face light up. "Grandma, but you know that I don't have time right now, and I can't take off work every week. I mean, I'm new to this company, but that's what weekends are for, to visit family and relax. Something tells me you have another reason." The old woman looked at her granddaughter's face with a sharp look, and Lisa felt an unpleasant heat in her mouth. She first took her eyes aside and began to rub the chrome on the tablecloth. "Grandma, you can't hide anything from you. You're testing thoughts from a distance." Trying to hide her embarrassment, Lisa took a sip from the cup and immediately burned her tongue. Ouch! How hot the bum in her mouth would pop out now. Along the wall, Molly took a sip of normal as well. "Tea is like tea. You're not talking my teeth. Spill your secrets. I can see your eyes burning. You got love in town." William exhaled noisily. "Oh, Grandma, you're a real piece of work. You're a real mind reader. Okay, don't be embarrassed. Go ahead. And I promise I won't say a word to anyone." "Oh yeah, did Grandma ever lie to you?" Lisa touched her lips gently to the cup. "All right, I'll tell you first. Anyway, Grandma, I've got a young man. We work together. Actually, he's kind of my boss. He's so old." The girl laughed. "No, he's only 26. It's just that we have a lot of departments, and each one has its own manager. James was recently replaced by someone who moved to another company. Yeah, we only have 6 people in the department, so the supervisor isn't too big." Molly nodded. "As we had in the accounting department was the entire staff of 5 people, but necessarily attached to supervisor. Grandmother now, the supervisors are quite different. And they do the usual work. They just have more responsibility. And what's good about this James of yours?" Lisa blushed again. "He's honest and decent, well-mannered." The girl stammered about Kelly immediately taking the initiative. "And that was that." Lisa mumbled. "He's also cute. And chicks are chicks. You can't choose a husband by his good looks, can you? That's how they get married for joy. And a year later they run away to get divorced. Your grandfather was a handsome man too. But in life, he turned out to be a scoundrel." William begged Grandma, "Why are you going to extremes? Of course, I can't 100% say that James meets all the canons of a real man, but I'm easy and interesting with him. We had a lot in common and we've been dating for almost 6 months. Want to take a first guess? Have you had a chance to take your application to the registry office yet?" The granddaughter threw herself into her grandmother's arms. "You're like an X-ray, aren't you?" "Yes, we applied a week ago. And I came to tell you the good news. But it's not working out yet. My mom's not in the mood. She's been having some problems at work. I know, my farm girls told me. But it'll all work out sooner or later. And my daughter's wedding is a once-in-a-lifetime thing. So you can't keep a secret like that for long. Perhaps this news will cheer Wendy up. Grandma, how great are you? It's just too bad you're not friends with Mom. Daddy and I love you both, but you're all at war with each other." The girl sympathized and began to kiss her grandmother. She gently pulled away from her. "Okay, enough sucking up. Take the salt. Run home. And your mother. Tell her not to put it off. She'll be offended." There was so much tenderness in the old woman's voice that William was stunned for a moment. But her grandmother gave her a push. "Run. Hurry up, Mother. You must be waiting for the salt." Perhaps the son transferred the excess energy to Lisa because she ran down the street in a sprint, scaring the chickens and ducks. After talking to Nana and her heart felt light, she wanted to sing songs and laugh. It was a moment of real happiness. And the girl remembered her soulmate. "I wonder what my James is doing at the moment. I should call him." She dialed her fiance's number several times, but he kept dropping her call. The sunny mood vanished at once, and Lisa wandered slowly back to her house. She gave her mother the salt, but the important conversation was postponed again. At the same time, James was in a meeting with his boss. Everyone's faces were tense because they were discussing important business matters. James also tried to get into the speech of the chief, but his thoughts were somewhere far away, not by the way in his jacket pocket cell phone. The young man tried to discreetly remove the cell phone from his pocket. It was Lisa. And the thought flashed through his mind that she had happened there. After all, She knows perfectly well that there is always a meeting at this time. He dropped the call and returned the cell phone to its original place, but the device twitched frantically in his pocket again. He had to reset the call again. Knowing the restless nature of his fiancée, James decided to write her a short message, but he could not do it discreetly. Wildly rotating his eyes, the supervisor stared at him. "Mr. James, I see that you absolutely do not care about the company's affairs, or in your division everything is on an A+. Caught off guard, the manager slowly stood up and stammered his excuses. "We also have shortcomings, but we try to correct them as they appear." The supervisor took a higher tone. "We should not wait for these problems to appear, but try to prevent them. I've already noticed that you, Mr. James, take your responsibilities lightly, and your department is in chaos." James tried to object, but the boss invited him to a seat with one look. "And don't try to say anything in your defense. All the faults of your work, so to speak, are there. Employees of your department are walking around the city during working hours without shame and conscience, and some of them you let go on unscheduled vacations." James guessed that someone had reported to the boss that he had given Lisa a week's vacation. Since it was useless to contradict the boss, he waited in silence for the rest of the rant, but the main one was limited to a couple of sentences. "It's a shame, James, that you haven't lived up to our trust. We put you in charge of the department to give you a chance to grow. What about you?" James already knew what the boss was going to say, and he almost shouted, "I'll make it up to you, I promise." Smiles appeared on the faces of the meeting participants, and some of them even laughed. The tension gave a crack, and the chief himself devoted faces. "I see that I am the only one who does not know what everyone here knows." Sitting, one of the deputy chiefs said, "Zach, do not swear. You guys are so strong. He's going through a special period." Someone loud enough with a laugh said, "Mating season." Everyone giggled, and even the boss showed his perfect smile. "But as long as it's the first time, we'll forgive it, but on the condition that we are invited to the wedding. If it's no secret, who's the bride?" The same connoisseur of bird leashes cheerfully answered the girl who joined us not so long ago. "You must remember her. She came to us from the institute with a red diploma." Chief rejoiced. "How well I remember her. Once she brought me reports. Although we have office romances are not welcome. But if everything is serious, we can only wish her happiness." On such a major note, the meeting ended, and James hurried to the exit. He wanted to hear the voice of his favorite girl, but no sooner had he dialed William's number than he was distracted again. James bitterly thought he would have to postpone the conversation until the evening, but his mother was waiting for him in the parking lot after work. "Nina," she looked at her son unhappily. "You're getting a little conceited. You've forgotten about your parents. I've been calling you all morning, but you've been throwing my calls away. Why don't you tell me what's going on?" James had an involuntary outburst. "So you're the one who's been calling me all morning, and I thought Lisa was trying to get to me." Nana gave her son a scornful look. "James, there's nothing wrong with you. Why such a pang of excitement? Have you been so badly influenced by this country girl?" Her mother's tone and the expression on her face spoke volumes about her attitude toward Lisa. She had disliked the girl from the first time she met her, and James imagined how shocked her mother would be when she heard about their imminent marriage. But he didn't want to discuss his marital status in a parking lot surrounded by strangers. He pushed his mother towards the car. "Nina, please, this is not the place for such delicate conversations." The woman went overboard. "Why are you pushing me into the car like I'm in a cage? My father is waiting for me outside the mall, and I want you to know that he's very unhappy with you and wants to talk to you. That's basically why I'm here." Since James blocked Nina's exit, she had to take the seat next to the driver. James slammed the door and got into the car as well. He calmly said, "Mom, what's with this stupid habit of yelling all over the street? By the way, I work here and my coworkers can hear your passages." The woman snapped back. "Let them hear you. Let them know who you're confusing with, Vasia. Mom, I'm asking you to watch your language. William doesn't deserve to be treated like this." "Nina," she screamed, Who the hell is she? You dug her up somewhere. Lisa works in my department. She graduated with a BA, by the way. What difference does that make? James couldn't help but smile. It's the kind of place where girls of all stripes flock to the city to pick up a richer man. James had an involuntary outburst. Mom, you're judging yourself, aren't you? If my memory serves me correctly, you're from the same provincial town. You came to this town about 30 years ago. Nina's eyes became unnaturally large. She turned pale and started gulping for air. James was scared out of his wits. He waved his handkerchief vigorously in front of the woman's face. Mammy, what's wrong with you? You can't take innocent jokes so keenly. The pale on her face was replaced by paint, and the mother pronounced clearly in syllables, "Don't you dare. Don't you dare ever speak to me in such a swaggering tone again. And don't compare me to that girl. Daddy and I had true love. It's the kind of love you write about in novels. And your Lisa's got a look on her face that says she's got a low-down agenda." James could barely contain his irritation. Every day is a new discovery. I didn't realize you were a face. You know, Mom, I'm not a little boy to be told how to live my life anymore. And I really hope you and Dad learn to respect my decisions. Nina threw her son another scornful look. Respect must be earned, not demanded. The woman tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge, and she shouted to James, "Let me out now." He silently got out of the car and walked around to the front. The door slid open smoothly, and Nina climbed out. James waited for his mother to gain a stable position and slowly pulled out of the parking lot. There was still hope in his soul that she would turn around and wave. Nina had a peculiar way of gesticulating. What do all professionals who work with hearing-impaired people do? James learned this sign language as a child and was very proud of this skill. His parents were always role models for him. But today, to his great regret, he realized that their kindness was played up, and sympathy for others was just a set of appropriate words. If also father was quite reserved, never boasted of his high status. Mother always tried to emphasize her belonging to the elite. James remembered the night he had decided to introduce Lisa to his parents without a second thought. Even 2 months after the event, he now felt a burning shame. Lisa became a part of his life very quietly. She did not whirlwind, as they write in books, and did not appear with a halo on her head in a cloud of a night dream. No, everything was banal beyond belief. James had just started his duties as head of the department and was trying to get used to the new place. He received a call from the receptionist at the main office in the morning. "James, to you literally from a minute to a minute should come a new employee to see her in the course of business, get acquainted with the team, and please, gently with her. The girl is very shy." James promised that everything will be at the highest level. No sooner had he hung up the phone than a timid knock sounded. He quickly assumed a superior appearance. Enter the small office, squeezed sideways, a person of about 30 years old in a very modest outfit. "Remember your promise." A young man jumped out from behind the desk and began to park himself in front of the female visitor. "Don't be shy. Come in and make yourself at home. We have a great team, and I am sure that you will make the best friends here." He said a dozen more phrases, not letting the visitor open her mouth. Then he gently took the woman under his elbow and led her to the door. "And now, I'll show you your workplace. We have the most modern computers and a reliable data protection system." All the employees of the department watched this scene with interest, when suddenly the aunt released her hand and asked very loudly, "Why do I need your computers? I can't even touch them. When I worked in another company, they were also full of such machines. I was warned not to go within 2 meters of them." There was a much talked about silence. The aunt was the first to break the pause. She looked pleadingly at James. "You'd better show me. Where are your toilets under the sotka?" "I'll get right to work." Only after the woman asked about the toilets, James realized that she was getting a job as a janitor. The members of the department were holding their bellies, and he didn't know where to go out of embarrassment. It was the first time he had ever been in such a ridiculous situation, and for a few minutes his anger boiled up in him. He even wanted to call the chief's secretary and tell her what he thought. But he had to finish the job with the new cleaning lady first. He showed the woman to the back rooms and returned to his office. No sooner had James sat down at his desk than there was another knock on the door. A girl resembling a schoolgirl appeared on the threshold. She politely ducked for some reason. "Hello, I'm here to see you at work." His brain boiled with indignation, and he thought another prank. Isn't that a lot for one day? The visitor continued to smile, and he too stretched his lips and said with a sneer, "For today, the limit of cleaners is exhausted. Come back when a spot becomes available." The girl looked at him with bewilderment. "Didn't you get a call?" He chuckled stupidly, but he had been called. "Well, I'm here." James felt an incredible excitement and was carried away. "Very good. I'm going to show you where the restroom is. And then I'll take you to the pantry where we keep the buckets and rags." He appeared before the girl, and she looked at him with astonished eyes. Then, in a suddenly firm voice, she asked, "Are you all right?" This question had the effect of a ringing slap, and James instantly regained his psychological equilibrium. "Why do I look so much like a freak?" The girl answered very calmly. "Your eyes are running like a crazy person, and in general, you're talking such nonsense." "Thank you. You brought me to my senses." Thinking back on that encounter, James was struck by how calm William was. She didn't frighten or cry with surprising equanimity. She waited for the denouement. At first, their relationship violence is purely official in nature. Only 2 months later, they found themselves in the same cafe during a lunch break. James managed to be the first to take a table and was enjoying his coffee when he noticed William. The girl was looking for an empty seat, and he waved to her. "William, you can land next to me." She thanked him politely, and he too, for the sake of decorum, asked, "Do you want me to wait? How would you like it?" 2 days later, he invited her to a cafe, and she accepted his invitation. This period was short-lived and was replaced by short walks after work, and then James invited her to a concert of a popular band. After the amazing event, they walked around the city until night and shared their impressions. James himself felt the need to move on to the next stage of the relationship. During their lunch break, which they traditionally spent in a cafe, he asked William, "How do you feel about dating?" She gave him a charming smile. "Positive. I think there is something mysterious in such meetings, besides romance, and I love anything with a spirit of secrecy. Yes, you should have studied economics, writing, or screenwriting." "Well, one doesn't preclude the other. I get my passion for everything from my father. He's like my mom says, not of this world. He's a creative man who likes to fantasize. You intrigue me, and I'd like to meet your father. I like unconventional people." "What do your parents do?" "My mom's a speech pathologist. She helps children and adults with speech problems. My father has recently been appointed rector of a very prestigious institute." The girl looked at James with respect. "You? And I have parents from simple peasants. My mother worked on the farm all her life, and my father delivered mail." James never paid much attention to the social status of his friends and acquaintances, so the information about Lisa's parents had slipped past his mind. He remembered it only when he decided to invite her to visit him. Of course, he had talked to her parents beforehand. Before the weekend, he showed up at their house late at night. The door was opened by his father. "Mother, our son showed up. Go meet him." Nina ran out into the hallway. She was wearing a robe, and all her face except her eyes was covered with a green mass. "James, you were unannounced as usual and caught your mom looking so inappropriate." "It's okay, Mom. I'm used to it, and it's beautiful. That's the most important thing to any woman. I'm glad you understand. Your father's been so unbearable lately, nagging me all the time." David smirked. "It's just boredom. We've been together for so many years that we're bored with each other." The man paused, winking slyly at his son. "I wish you'd gotten married. Otherwise, my mother and I will never have grandchildren." James also winked at his father. Perhaps your wish will soon come true. I think I've met the girl I wish to always have by my parents' side. How would you like to meet her?" David was genuinely excited. It was felt both by his lively conversation and his mood. But Nina was wary of the news and spent the whole evening asking her son and his girlfriend. There was an important visit the following weekend, and James immediately realized that William did not like his mother. The guest also sensed the hostess's dislike, and the whole evening was very stilted. When it was time to serve tea, Nina called her son James. "Help me, I can't do it alone." The young man went into the kitchen and immediately came under fire of criticism. Nina whispered so loudly that he shut the door tighter. "My son, who have you brought into our house? Are you really going to tie your life to this wire?" "Mom, we haven't decided anything yet. We're just dating. But I'm not gonna lie to you. I like Lisa a lot. She's an extraordinary girl. They're all extraordinary at first, and then they become bitches and divide the property." "Mom, why do you have to tar a man with tar?" "I'm just trying to open your eyes, son. Take a closer look at your Lisa. Think about it. If you still value our opinion, I can tell you that this girl is no match for you." James didn't want to spoil the mood, and after a boring tea party, he left his parents' house with Lisa. The girl was sad and silent the whole way, only in front of the hostel where she was temporarily staying. She said wistfully to James, "You should have organized this meeting for nothing. Your parents didn't like me. I don't know about your father. Your mom is definitely turning against me. Don't fill your head with bad thoughts. My mother is a difficult person. Just ignore her." Soon they applied to the registry office, but they did not inform their parents about this step. For a long time in James's head, obsessive thoughts were spinning the word combination of unequal marriage thrown by his mother. But after the last conversation with his mother, he realized that it was time to draw the line and notify his parents of his decision. His father called the next day. "James, we need to meet and talk. Mom was really mad last night, and I want to know what you said to her." James had been waiting for this call and had time to prepare for it mentally. He calmly replied, "It's more like she told me, and a whole cartload more." There was metal in David's voice. "Son, but you know that your mother is worried about you. You're the only one we have. That's why we're so worried. Dad, you and Mom are missing one important detail. I'm 26 years old. Okay, let's really talk about this when we meet. Okay, I'll meet you at 6 o'clock in the city park. Our spot." As a child, James often spent time with his father in the recreation park. It was a favorite spot for the townspeople, and it was always crowded on weekends. David was an avid hunter and loved to demonstrate his marksmanship at the shooting range. He also patiently taught his son how to hit a 10-pointer. These memories put on sad thoughts. But why do all the best things happen in childhood? But it is only when a person grows up, as this notorious gap of misunderstanding between the closest people arises. With this question, he turned to his father. We waited for him near the shooting range. David was surprised. "You decided to start with the main thing right away. Well done. And I spent the whole day thinking how to get to a delicate subject. Dad, it seems to me that our conversation has no sense at all, because Lisa and I have already decided everything." The elder James furrowed his brow. "You mean like decided?" "Yeah, we're usually adults and haven't needed parental guidance for a long time. Anyway, we've already applied, and in 3 months you'll sign." David plunged into thought. James waited patiently, and he really wanted to draw a line at this stage of his life. He understood that his parents sincerely wished him happiness, but they had a very different understanding of happiness. As if reading his thoughts, his father said, "Of course, your mother, and I didn't think this would happen." "That's right, Dad, but can you script out even one single life? I don't think these things are negotiable, because only 2 people should decide their own destiny. And Lisa and I have already made our choice. Do you like it or not?" David patted his son on the shoulder. "Come on, don't get emotional. I promised to talk to my mother today." They talked some more about small things and said goodbye. The next day, Nina showed up at the office. She strode down the hall with a confident gait, and admiring glances followed her. When James saw his mother, he was numb with surprise. Nina was pleased with the effect. "James, Dad, and I had a talk yesterday, and here I am. Take me to your Lisa. I'd really like to talk to her for a while." James looked suspiciously at his mother, but she reassured him. "Don't worry. I won't say anything unnecessary. It's just a matter of getting on with things." He showed his mother where Lisa worked and left the women alone. Nina came back again half an hour later. She is a nice girl and smart. James was very worried, although he tried to hide it. His mother touched his arm affectionately. "James, I'm not your enemy. Don't worry. We just talked a little, and I even liked the girl. By the way, I invited her parents to visit. I think that's the right thing to do, because we need to think together about where to have your wedding. Mom, Lisa and I wanted to keep it quiet. It doesn't matter what you wanted. Our opinions matter too. You know your fiancé's father is a great accordion player. He plays at his weddings over there." "Yes, Lisa told me." Nina looked lovingly at her son again and sighed. "Maybe you two can work something out." "Well, I'll leave you to it. I suggest you go to the village yourself." James was surprised. "Why would I go there? What kind of stupid question is that? Will you bring your relatives in your car?" "Mom, William's parents have their own car, and even her mother drives the car well." This news startled the woman, and she puckered her lips at his obnoxious smirk. James had unmistakably guessed her mood. "Mother, did you really think the countryside was home to beggars and wretches who ate cucumbers and potatoes and slept in haylofts? I think it's time for you to visit your relatives. Don't you feel drawn back to your native land?" "No, I don't. I'll tell you more. My childhood memories are not exactly pleasant, but I don't want you to know my little secrets. Let things remain as they are." She looked at him again with that unique look that only a mother can give. William had confessed to her mother just before she left that she was getting married. She had chosen a very unfortunate moment to do so, for Wendy was again busy with riddles. She couldn't hold the jar, and it fell to the floor. Brine splashed across the surface of the active foot of the hostess. "Daughter, it's a joke." Lisa grabbed a rag. "Mom, why are you like this? How should I behave? Tell me, how should I behave after what you said? You're not ready for married life." William has also joined the emergency response. "Wendy, think of yourself. You didn't prepare for marriage from the cradle, and you've survived and learned everything. And so will our daughter. She's a smart girl." Wendy was silent for a moment to gather her thoughts, then threw a light shawl over her shoulders. "I'm going to my grandmother's to talk to her." William was surprised, but decided it was better to keep silent. When his wife came out, he winked at his daughter. "Well, gentlemen of the jury, I think the ice is breaking. Maybe my lovely women will come to an amicable settlement." The man was right. In the fall, for the first time in 22 long years, she greeted her daughter-in-law cordially by a different kind of Wendy. She guessed she already knew everything. Passable, good, don't worry about it. That's how everybody gets married. You and I need to think about what we're getting for the wedding. Wendy exhaled. "Oh, Molly, believe me, I'm not thinking about presents right now. I'm thinking about how she'll be alone without us there. Yeah, she'll be fine. She went to college, and nothing's missing from her husband's life. If this James is as she described him, you don't have to be so dismissive about the gift. I've already got an idea." The mother-in-law summarized her idea, and the daughter-in-law was shocked again. "Do you think it will work?" I said sure it would. I've already found out everything, and even found a good lawyer. But that's how much money we'll have to throw away. The old woman waved her hand carelessly. "Why should I take these papers with me to the next world? At least it would be good for her only granddaughter." Lisa knew nothing about the negotiations between the relatives. After a week's vacation, she came back to the city, and on the first day, she was visited by her future mother-in-law, Nina. She was not the same as when she visited, and Lisa even liked her. The girl was even more pleased when James, and that his parents were expecting her relatives. Lisa, you probably know that in the olden days there was such a tradition. The girl interrupted the young man. If you are referring to the courtship, then in the villages this custom is still observed. Only the groom's relatives come to the bride. We're gonna do the opposite. I don't mind being the object of everyone's attention for one evening. The joke turned out well, and they laughed at it together in a merry excitement. The future newlyweds imagined how the party would go, but they did not expect the turn the event would actually take. The whole Medvedev family at the appointed time appeared by car to the house where the professor's couple lived. James's parents tried to show their cordiality and hospitality. David succeeded quite well. Nina's smile and words lacked sincerity. William whispered to his wife, "If we were to evaluate according to Stanislavski, I would now loudly say I do not believe." The man did not calculate the possibilities of his voice. And this phrase really sounded loud. The smile fell off Nina's face. "Did you say something?" "I'm sorry, I didn't hear you." William quickly realized what to say. "Yes, I wanted to say that I don't believe those who say that life is so much better in the city. We've only been here a few hours and already we're dizzy from the noise. And your air isn't as clean as ours in the country. You probably can't find any food in the store that isn't full of crap." The James spouses looked at each other uncomprehendingly. Nina indignantly said, "I, too, lived in a small town, and my grandmother even kept a cow at the wall." Molly cheerfully picked up on that. "And I still do to this day. The cow feeds us and allows for some luxuries." The mask of decency instantly flew off the face of the hostess. "What are you talking about? What luxuries in the countryside? There are no proper stores there. I'm not even talking about a beauty parlor or a hairdresser's. Of course, I realize that every waiter has to praise his swamp, but you don't even have a normal wedding." The guests were silent and averted their eyes. Only on the wall Molly fixed her gaze on the groom's mother. "Why are you so bad about the village? You think you were bitten to death by mosquitoes there. Believe me, we're no slouch over there, either. And we have our holidays the way they should be celebrated. Tell me, what are you going to give your children for the wedding?" James and I exchanged glances again. This time it was the professor himself who answered. "We decided to give them a fairy tale. That is, an unforgettable trip to the end of the world," and Nina's lips curled. "You probably haven't heard of such a place as the Maldives." Molly accepted the challenge. "You don't think we're that stupid? Have we heard of these islands? Have we seen it on TV? But I do not understand. Why should they go there? If we can relax on the river, it's just a waste of money. My daughter-in-law and my son, and I decided to give them a company." Kelly expected anything but silence. The would-be matchmakers looked at her, trying to contain their laughter. Not Nina. She couldn't hold it in first and laughed at bay. "Grandma, what firm? Where did you get that kind of money?" Kelly threw aside conventionality. "You're not laughing. I'm not kidding, am I? I'm actually buying a firm that's bankrupt. I've got the accounts, I've got everything. Just in time for the wedding. Let the kids do what they want, and I'll be an investor for a while. That is, I'll invest the rest of the money in them." There was silence at the table again. Only Nina's smile disappeared from her face. "I don't get it, even if it's not a joke." "As you say, bursting into tears." Molly smirked. "What's the fancy word for it? Come on, granddaughter, help me out." When all sorts of tests are conducted, Lisa as frightenedly prompted a quest exactly the same. "Let's see how our newlyweds, whom we have taught for so many years, will pass this quest." "Well, and we will always help advice." Nina looked at her husband confused. Everything had not gone according to the plan she had made. After the words about the Maldives, the newly married relatives had to get embarrassed, to start thinking about what it was. And when would they realize that they weren't in the clear? Now the Rudolph woman clearly felt as if they were the ones who were out of place. William looked at the satisfied grandmother and mother with equal surprise. James, too, flapped his eyes in silence. but his mind was already full of grandiose plans. He was confident in both his own abilities and those of his future wife. William was the most confused of all. He did not understand at all what the conversation was about. Besides, he was terribly offended that he had not been consulted. All right, Wendy, he was used to her not thinking of him as a human being. But Mom, how could she sleep with his wife? In general, William was even scared. Of course, he always said that he suffered from the fact that Molly and Wendy do not get along. But now, if they become good at communicating, it is likely to be so. His William's quiet life would come to an end. David, the rolling lasted, and everyone turned to him as if he was the only one who could say the right thing right now. I'm thinking, Nina, as we're still in the middle of buying a trip, maybe it's more rational to just give the kids the money. Let them invest it in their own business. Something tells me that with a grandmother like that, all doors will be open to them, and everything will work out. Nina, she looked at her husband as if he were a traitor, then silently got up from the table and left. James followed her about 10 minutes later. At her, Nana refused to come out, told him to pass on her apologies because she suddenly had a terrible migraine. Wendy got up. We should get going too. David got up from the table. Where are you going? It's almost night, and you still have miles to go. Wendy smiled. She caught it, and when she woke up, she answered him. But we are not on the edge of the world, and we live only a couple of hours, and we are already home. Besides, you forget that we are not city dwellers, and we have a household at home. David looked at the future wedding party with surprise. Oh, she knows how to discreetly send to the defendant too. But see for yourself. By the way, we never really talked about the wedding. William was in the hallway reprimanding his father because he's inconspicuous, and it's not clear how he got his hands on it. James helped support him. Wendy looked at her host with a smile. Well, now it's your turn to come to us, and make sure you stay overnight. You need to see how clean the air is in the evening in our area. David now realized that William, that her mother, they didn't open up right away. She seemed like an ordinary, modest woman from the countryside. But it's a pleasure to talk to her. She pronounced the words correctly, and there was no hint of any rustic intonation. He suddenly became terribly curious to see how the future matchmakers lived. He remembered, of course, that today they had the task of embarrassing Lisa's parents and upsetting the wedding. But now he realized that there would be a wedding, even if they forbade it on pain of death. As the guests left the room, Nina came out. What are we going to do? David at first wanted to answer with harshness, but then he thought that as his wife, he was also going to do everything to upset this wedding. So he went up to his wife, hugged her, and you and I will be going to visit our future in-laws. Because of your migraine, we never got to discuss the wedding. But David, that's it, Nina. Let's just get over it. Try to accept the situation. By the way, the more I talk to Lisa, the more I like her. You know, she's got some kind of inner chord, you know. She looks like a dandelion girl, a shepherdess. Dig a little further. No, you should definitely just get to know her better. And then all our assumptions, as you can see, didn't pan out. I don't think Lisa is at all interested in our untold riches either. The last words were said in such a pompously theatrical tone that Nina couldn't stand it and threw the wrong career David. James tried not to get in front of his parents. First of all, he was still a little shocked by Lisa's gift from the family. And secondly, he knew how hard it was to lose, or rather, to accept losing. And his mom had definitely lost. He'd just wait until things settled down. Tonight, he and Lisa were to meet the firm that Lisa's grandmother had mentioned. Of course, its sale was not a quick matter, but the owner, who was very anxious to get rid of it, had kindly offered them a familiarization tour. The feeling was very unusual. They go together to see their future business. The mother called 4 days later. "Hello, son," James cautiously answered, not expecting anything good. "Hello, Mom. Why did you disappear?" "No, I haven't disappeared. A lot of work, and the firm was getting acquainted. He almost bit his tongue off. But why does he tell his mother that? She wouldn't be happy for him anyway. James was sure of it. Well, you tell your father, you know, I'm not good at financial matters. Dad's the head here, and I'm more of a spendthrift. That's not what I'm talking about. We didn't agree on the wedding. Well, if you be so kind as to call. Let her find out when it's convenient for us to come. But I can't just say I accept your faith. But I'll try. James hung up the phone, wanted to dial Lisa's number. Then he waved goodbye and went to her. When he told her about his mother's call, he grinned suddenly. You know, it's so unusual for Lisa to feel that her mother won't be giving us a hard time anymore. William smiled. Well, she's understandable. You're her only son. It's understandable that she'd hate to let you go. James looked at his fiancée with admiration. You know, you're amazing. I mean, you know perfectly well that your mom was against you, and now you're defending her. Lisa shrugged. It's enough to put yourself in her shoes. What do you think? My mom cried tears of delight when I informed her I was getting married. They laughed. God, what kind of punishment am I in for? William, why are you lying down? It's going to get mossy. William pretended to be sound asleep, and you give him a kernel on the forehead or a bucket of cold water. The man opened his eyes abruptly. Somehow he had missed the moment when his mother came to them. He must have dozed off. Well, since Molly's here in the fall, there's no resting. This Wendy was all more words, and his mother had never been shy about means to an end. He sat down on the bed. What are you clucking like chickens? I have to build a terrace so that you can gather there and not disturb my rest. There's no family time. And by the way, I went to bed after 2 o'clock. Wendy turned to him immediately. What do you think? If I hide the TV from you at night, will you go to bed on time? William ate and got along. What can she do? She'll just hide it. Women are out of control. He looked at his mother, then at Wendy. They both looked at him with the same expression. William thought to himself, this is it. The worst that could ever come has arrived. They laughed. So my song is over. But no, we'll fight on. What's this early morning meeting? Wendy put her hands to her sides before she started to tell him off. When you were watching your soccer game last night, did you notice anything else? William stared at her uncomprehendingly. I was watching soccer, but I was hiding beer under the chair. What's soccer without beer? What could have happened last night? A star fell from the sky, and I'm gonna fall on you, and you're gonna have a star burning between your eyes on the wall. Molly nodded her head in agreement, and I might add, William was starting to freak out. Why can't you two, like crazy people, say something normal? Wendy even pushed with her foot. I told you yesterday I came up to you twice, and you didn't even notice me. William wrinkled his forehead. That was exactly right. He only remembered that he thought she was trying to take the beer away from him, so he pretended that such a tense moment in soccer. William, James's parents are coming over this weekend, and he's, you know. William rubbed his hands together. He really liked the holidays. First of all, it's fun. Second of all the good stuff Wendy cooks that you can eat for a week. You can eat for a week. Third, of course, there'd be the booze he'd always been forbidden. And fourthly, when there are guests, when there's no one bothering him, he can legally do nothing. That is, he and so, of course, especially will not break a leg, but in the holiday it can be done quite officially. But as it turned out, Molly is not the only one who has an expert on nutritional thoughts. Wendy immediately said, if you think that you will lie quietly on the couch to wait for guests, you are deeply mistaken. Now you have breakfast, and you're going to finally finish the terrace, and then clean up the yard. You're going to make the place look nice. William even laughed. Well, you've got a terrace to build and build. What can I do there in 3 days? Molly intervened. Don't worry, son, I'll help you. Wear with a word, and wear with a stick along the spine. William stopped smiling. You can't be serious, can you? Wendy nodded. I couldn't be more serious. You have exactly 2 hours to tell me what you're missing. I'll go and get some, and I have to go to work. William looked from one to the other and realized they weren't joking at all. In fact, to be honest, he wasn't going to finish this terrace this year. It's a long time coming. You have to think about it. You have to think about it. You have to take your time. Now what? William began to dress in silence. He was thinking hard about what he could think of to say that it was impossible. But then his mother said something that made him drop his shirt. "Oh, Wendy, I don't know what you see in him. Skinny and not much of a man. Lazy as I don't know what. Well, that's all right. We'll have to re-educate him. Better late than never." William now clearly realized that he had no choice. In the past, you could run from Wendy to your mother, complain, to hear that it was the pebbles that drove him to the end. Now there was no one to complain to, nowhere to hide. Nana paced nervously around the apartment. "David, but why do we have to stay overnight? There are obviously no facilities there. And in general, Nina did not inflame before time. First of all, they didn't look ancient to me, so I wouldn't say it's bad. Secondly, he hesitated, and his wife looked at him in surprise. You see, Nina, all work is running around. If he rests, then Maldives, because the position obliges. Just recently I realized that I would sit on the beach with a fishing rod and even beat mosquitoes with pleasure." Nina involuntarily smiled, imagining this picture. Well, it would probably be much better without mosquitoes. "David, only let you promise me that if there's a cabin there, we'll go back home in the evening." "Okay." David trumps. "Yes, my general." And Nina sighed. They'd been married for so many years. In public, they're always serious and collected. But at home, when not seen, even their son David could fool around. And then, as if in an instant, the years passed away. And it became so easy, so joyful. And then a little sad, because you begin to realize that a lot of things will never happen again. Let's think again about what we should take with us. David looked at the 2 huge bags that stood in the middle of the room. "I didn't realize how long we're going for." "Not Nina. Are you inoculated?" "What is it?" "Nothing extra blankets, bed medicine, warm clothes, light clothing." She would have gone on and on with the list. But David put his hands up. "Stop. That's not how it works. Imagine if someone came to visit you with all that stuff. You'd probably be offended. So what do you suggest? We'll travel light." "Sure. Well, we'll stop by, get something. A delicatessen cake." Nina sighed, then just stepped over the bags. "But then let's go. I'll sort it all out later." David looked at his wife carefully. Nina was just obsessed with cleanliness and order, and to leave the bags in the middle of the apartment and drive away. Apparently she was in two-shot feelings. He put his arm around her. "Well, look at me." Nina obediently looked up. "Do you want our son to be happy?" She nodded. "But I'm not preventing him from that. Just help." James picked them up when they were already out in the yard. "Oh, I'm surprised I don't have to force you into the car." David helped his wife into the car, then sat down himself and didn't drive. "I don't trust you." James immediately took offense. "Then you should have driven your own car." "I trust you." David, embarrassed by the purse. "Well, no offense, I said it without thinking. My mother and I are a little nervous." James sighed. "I'm nervous too. The first meeting didn't go well. But we'll see how the second one goes." James had a cell phone. It was on a stand that rested on a panel. Lisa was calling, and it was a video call. He had no choice but to take the call. David immediately turned the phone towards him. "Hello, William." "James, you drive. You talk. He can hear you." William was confused. Then she looked at her future father-in-law. "Daddy wants to know how to make a sauna. Do you like to steam?" David felt a twinge in his cheekbones. He had only been in a bathhouse a couple of times and had never been able to do it again. He smiled. "Girls, I don't know if I'm in love or not, but I'm willing to try anything." William laughed, nodded her head, and said goodbye. Nana said, "David, be careful what you wish for. You're not a boy anymore." David replied, "Everything will be all right. You'll see." In an hour or an hour and a half, James' passengers fell asleep on the road. He said, "Well, if the navigator is right, we are almost there." David rubbed his eyes and looked around. They were driving through a fairly large and also very modern village. There's nothing to it. What was his mother so afraid of? James looked tensely at the houses and finally smiled. "There's William's house, waiting for us, Nina," and scrutinizing the house. "Yeah, it might even be a good place to sleep. Who knows? Maybe there's even water in the house." There was water and a toilet in the house. Of course, I didn't immediately praise William, and he was modestly silent that as soon as it was time to deal with the sewage, he immediately switched to some illnesses as serious as migraine and colic. Wendy had to hire laborers. That's how they built the whole place. The guests don't need to know that at all. And here we have the terrace. Have a seat. Now we'll have tea before the bath, and after the bath we'll sit down. William carefully hid behind his back, interrupting his fingers. Oh, how much I wanted to tell him how he was working like a mother, even if she wouldn't let him take a break for a while. But intercepting a glance in the wall, Molly only sighed. Nina was staring at the chair, around which Wendy and William were snooping. And this is called just having tea. In her mind, tea is a mugged tea and candy. And here it was all so unhealthy, but so appetizing. She silently watched as her husband, a respectable man who even at home ate only with the proper food utensils, with some sort of gleeful pleasure scooped a large bright wooden spoonful of sour cream, which for some reason did not run off the spoon, did not drip, but just stood lump on it and sent it into her mouth. David even squeezed his eyes shut with pleasure, and then, without opening his eyes, he said to Nina, "Do you think that what we eat, sour cream, it's nothing like that. Sour cream turns out to be completely different." Molly smiled approvingly that the future relative didn't seem to be as bad as she had first thought. She moved a plate of cottage cheese over to him. David aimed and scooped up an equally large mound. James and Lisa watched him with a smile. They Nina. Jana frantically tried to calculate how many calories were in it all. Then it was time to try her own smoked meat, then Grandma Kelly's pies. After 10 minutes, Nina gave up. Everyone at the table was eating with such gusto that it was impossible to resist. She felt like she couldn't even move. Wendy invited her into the house. "Come on, Nina, I'll show you where you'll sleep. In fact, let the men rest without us." Molly went to the veranda to rest, and Lisa, Nina, and Wendy headed into the house. Nay found behind the lady of the house and realized that, strangely enough, she did not annoy her. Not forever, explained obese women. Even if they were only 2 pounds overweight, Wendy was well over 2 pounds. She wasn't fat, more like pudgy. Wendy's movements were swift. The house, as Nina had time to notice, was perfectly clean, which was very important to her. And she also realized that to imagine Wendy thin simply could not. "This is your room, and James's." "I style on the veranda." Nina raised her eyebrows in surprise. "A whole room?" "Well, of course, I don't want you to feel. You can rest if you want. It'll take a couple more hours." Nina did not rest, or rather, didn't let her husband David. He came into her room. "Nina, let's go for a walk to see the people. We'll go to the river." She wanted to refuse, but she saw such a plea in her husband's eyes that she just sighed. They hadn't gone 100 meters when an old man appeared in front of them, as if from under the ground. "Good health." Nana regarded him with amazement. He was a complete image of the old men from the fairy tales. David had a particularly happy smile. "Hello." Going further was out of the question. The old man was standing in such a way that he would have to be defiantly bypassed, and since he was not going to retreat, it's not all said. That means you have to be polite. I can't admit it. Whose will you be? We, grandfather, are nobodies. We came to visit who? The situation was getting ridiculous, but it was clear that it was better to answer, because this grandfather will not just leave. Were Wendy and William more important than matchmakers? Well, you could say that. The old man thought for a while. Yeah, you're lucky to have Wendy. She's a respected person. I suppose you could say indispensable. If anything happens, everyone goes to her. And they know that if anyone can save a tunny, it's Wendy. Her mother-in-law is a real bitch. But what's there to say about her? Molly is Molly. The old man disappeared as suddenly as he'd appeared. Nina even helped with her eyes. And then she asked, "What was that?" David, rubbing his hands together happily, answered it was Nina. Local color. Let's hurry up and see the river ahead. He grabbed his arm and almost sideways dragged him towards the river. Nina praised herself for her foresight. She had time to change into high-heeled shoes and simple slippers and rushed after her husband. Again, she remembered those years when she and Dima had just met. He would grab her by the hand and drag her somewhere where, in his opinion, she should be very interesting. When Nina was distracted by the beauty of the river for a moment, her husband disappeared. She looked back and saw him having a serious conversation with a boy of about 7 who was sitting with a fishing rod. Then David stood up, shook his hand, and returned to her. Nina remained silent. She knew for sure that he wouldn't stand for it, and for sure he would. Not 5 minutes later, David was talking fast. "You won't believe it, but the children in the village are so mature. Will be waiting for me tomorrow at 6:00 a.m. and will even bring me a fishing rod. No way. Look, David, we're not playing too hard to get. David, be serious. You know, the more I'm here, the more I realize we're playing in the city. Here in this place, you can just be yourself." Nina sighed. Her husband was right about something. She understood that, but she didn't want to accept it. Nina had spent so long building it all up. Their whole world, or a fiction. Was the bath a huge shock for Nina? No, of course. She'd been to saunas and all the fancy bathhouses. They were sitting on the terrace. And William, who had already taken on chest, waving his fingers with pathos, said, "No, you just look around, what beauty, what latitude." Wendy smiled affectionately at him. "Father, you'd better get an accordion instead of ranting. Play us something for our souls." He looked at his hands doubtfully, but then waved his hand. A real master of his craft. A hammered finger is no obstacle at all. Nina sat pressed against her husband, and David even covered his eyes to listen to the melody. As bad as William's economic acumen was, he was certainly a musician of God. When the melody subsided, Nina suddenly said, "You know, I owe you an apology for both my behavior and my thoughts not being as good as I am right now. It's been a long time since you've had one. There's such a calmness here, as if it were the only right place in the world. I confess I thought the girl from the village was no match for my son at all. But now I think we're very lucky for him too." Wendy smiled, and Molly said, "Don't worry, Nina. I came here about 50 years ago, and I couldn't get over the fact that it's nice here, and the people are nice. I called the whole village a fancy word then. So now I wear that word as a nickname. All my life, David stood up, and I had a great idea." William immediately grabbed the bottle, for the idea needs a drink. Wendy gave him a stern look, and William immediately snickered. "Wendy, what are you doing?" "It's for the idea." William laughed after her. "James, it's like they've been forgotten about." They were watching their parents with pleasure from their corner. Their laughter was picked up by their grandmother, and then by everyone. And David continued, "So we're all here today because of the children. But there is such an atmosphere here that you don't want to think about anything serious. And here's my idea. But please note, it's just an idea. If the young people don't like it, we'll forget about it." He was silent for a moment, as if choosing words. "Pretty soon our children will be a family, thanks to their grandmother. But they'll have plenty for their parents to do, too, of course, so we won't see them very often. And if we can catch them in the city," Wendy sighed sadly. She had been thinking about it for days, and the future matchmaker went on. "And I think, let's at least have a wedding in the village. Here, such vastness, we will all bring Toastmaster waiters. You can't imagine how great it would be. Nina wanted to be indignant, but how could you even think of such a thing? And the guests, and the outfits, and the beauty parlors. How could her husband even imagine all this? But for some reason, the words wouldn't come. I was thinking of some kind of dashing, beautiful rustic fun. And it had to be outdoors. David eyed his wife warily, but she kept silent. Then he turned to Lisa and James. What do you say? James was also excited by the idea that we could have a party here that no one in the village had ever seen. Lisa looked at him in surprise. Wow, didn't you say you didn't want all those boring ceremonies? This is boring, and this is here. Zach hugged David. You don't understand. This is not a vacation. This is a super vacation. And what a family this is. It's amazing. And they both work for me. James said he's quitting. But I don't take offense. I understand that young people need to develop. James Lyra's boss had been drinking a lot, and now the whole world was trying to put him in the car that came for him. But it wasn't so easy. That's for a drink. That toast is good. That hug not everyone. But in the end, after the last passage, he had to be carried to the car. Colleagues David respected and serious people were not in the best condition. They all said the air here was special. It's like nowhere else. Such a wedding the village really has not seen for many years, and maybe never heard of at all. All the neighbors were there, everyone who had any contact with the Madrid family. How many more from the city? Only a year after the event, James and Lisa were already ahead of the curve with their first orders, and David recommended her to his friends. They didn't have kids around much anymore. It's understandable that they had so many. But Nina and David didn't worry much. There was no time for them. Every weekend, right after work, their car went clapping. As they traveled to their relatives, they stayed with them. But a little more, and the house they were building would be ready. A place to spend their old age, a place to rest from the noisy city. They chose, of course, Clappers.
Subscribe and click the bell.
Why do I have to clean up after him? Mary asked in a deliberately squeaky voice, her lips puckered. You don't have to, honey. I just asked you to help because I can't do it myself. You shouldn't have had so many kids if you couldn't handle it. Mary muttered. Emma ignored the jab. What was a teenage girl to do, especially if she had to help raise her younger siblings instead of the usual teenage chores, which she did quite well, despite her objections? You can understand her. Fiddling with kids is not something you want to do at 15. Unlike many people, especially those with many children, Emma did not think that such help was the sacred duty of the eldest child, especially if he happened to be born a girl. Therefore, she was very grateful to her daughter. If it had been her will, she would never have put such a burden on Mary, but she had no special options. She really couldn't handle it all on her own. All of her children, Emma had given birth to quite deliberately. A large family had been her dream since she herself had been a child. The woman carried this desire through her life, and in the end it came true. She had everything she could dream of, 5 beautiful children, and a loving husband, an endless number of relatives ready to help and support her. Mary was considerably older than her siblings. After a difficult labor and caring for a weak, sickly child, Emma could not decide for a long time even to have a second one. However, when the eldest daughter turned 9, James was still born. 2 years later, Kayla was born, and after 3 more twins, Cindy and Ethan. So they lived a large, close-knit family that included Emma's husband, Edward, and his parents. Their home was large, spacious, and bright, and in addition, there was always someone from their spouse's numerous relatives. Aunts and uncles, brothers, sisters, relatives, cousins, second cousins, third cousins. In short, there was someone to help with the children and household chores. It was all very recent, a year ago, But Emma sometimes felt that these memories belonged to some very old times, or maybe they were not memories at all, but dreams and dreams. In their present situation, it all seemed utterly unreal. Trouble came, as often happens, quite unexpectedly. Exactly a year ago, she was at home alone. Except for the children, her husband was away on business. His numerous relatives were also busy with something. Her parents, who usually lived with them, had gone to the dacha when the first warm days came. They always left for the whole summer, though, and the rest of the family was soon to join them. They stayed in town only because Edward still had some business to attend to. Yes, Mary needed to pass her midterm exams to be accepted into 10th grade the following year. James, 5, was in his room playing with his 3-year-old sister, happily showing his sister his collection of cars. Only occasionally did Emma stop by to check on the kids. Her room was just behind the wall, so if anything happened, she would be able to react quickly to the danger. Mary had gone out with her friends, so the only thing Emma had to worry about was the newborn twins. Fortunately, unlike her eldest daughter, they were in excellent health and were, as they called it, gift children. They almost never screamed and were quite capable of occupying themselves with a variety of rattles. Also, on some nonverbal level, they could communicate with each other and were quite content in each other's company. In short, the day passed, as it always did, cheerfully and quietly. It seemed that it would always be like that. That time had frozen, that now there would be an endless June day outside the window, warm but not too warm, cozy and sunny. Emma felt absolutely happy. It was then that she realized that she had finally achieved the realization of her most important dream, and now she was truly happy. Toward evening, Mary returned and began to tell her mother how wonderful her day had been and what interesting things had happened on the walk. Emma listened to her daughter half-heartedly as she was concentrating on feeding the babies. Giving a bottle of formula to both of them at once was not as easy as she had thought, and feeding them one at a time, they couldn't stand it and started crying together. As a result, neither of them could eat. Mary, however, did not need an attentive listener. She was overwhelmed by the impressions that came out. The main thing for her was to tell about them as soon as possible, before the emotions tore the girl from the inside, and whether her words reached someone's ears was not so important. After feeding the younger children and making sure they were sleeping sweetly in their beds, Emma took care of the older ones. Setting the table in the living room, she brought in an afternoon snack. James and Mary, of course, were already able to eat on their own, but little Kayla had not quite gotten the hang of the spoon yet, so from time to time Emma came to help her. She didn't eat, she didn't want to, and she was used to eating in the company of her husband, who would be back soon. When the children had eaten, she began to prepare dinner for the two of them. No guests were expected that evening. Nevertheless, the process still dragged on for a couple of hours. Emma, having caught the culinary inspiration, could not stop and started to prepare not only the hot dish, but also the dessert. It was only after putting the cake in the freezer and checking once again that the kids were okay that she glanced at the clock and realized how much time had passed. Her husband should have been back about half an hour ago, but he was still gone. Emma wasn't particularly worried about it. There was no telling what might have caused the delay. Surely he was about to show up, otherwise he would have called to warn her that he had a change of plans. But another half hour passed, then an hour, 2, 3, and he was still gone. That's when Emma began to worry. And Mary, who knew her father's habits, sensed something wrong. The two of them began to call Edward, but to no avail. Time after time, the mechanical voice reported that the subscriber's phone was switched off or was out of range. After the 10th call, his further recommendation to call back later seemed absolutely mocking to the woman. Having failed to wait for her husband and father, everyone went to bed, all except Emma, who was to be on night duty at the baby's crib, and in any case, she would hardly be able to sleep. Sitting beside the cradle, the woman listened every minute for the key in the lock or the creak of the door, but all was silent. Edward did not appear during the night or in the morning. It was then that she first asked Mary to watch the younger children, and she went to the nearest police station to file a missing persons report. She couldn't imagine what else there was to do in such a situation. The officer on duty didn't take her problem too seriously. He was extremely reluctant, but still accepted the report from her. However, he remarked, "Your husband is an adult. Perhaps he has some reasons of his own for not showing up at home. Then he would have definitely given notice. He always calls or writes if he's going to be more than an hour late." Emma objected, "And he always keeps his phone charged and never turns it off. Things happen. Maybe he went out with an old friend and forgot about everything, or even worse. Not for him, of course, but for you." "How dare you?" Emma exclaimed indignantly. "Look, I understand you perfectly well, but alas, such cases happen all over the place. You can't imagine how many people come to us to complain about missing wives and husbands. As a rule, they are quite decent people, and in the end, after a week or two, our employees find this decent man in bed with his mistress. My husband is not like that." Emma objected rather sluggishly, more out of inertia. It was clear that she couldn't prove anything to the policeman, and why should she? He had taken a statement, so they would have to deal with the case anyway. Nothing else from the police was required now, so the woman went home after all. Her children were waiting for her. On her way back, Emma secretly hoped that her husband would be home by now. Maybe he really had met some old buddy and was now sitting by the twins' cradle, repenting for making the family worry. The house, however, was as empty as Emma had left it, and to her surprise, not only Edward, but none of his relatives were to be found there. It had never happened before that no one had visited them for 2 whole days. A bored Mary sat by the twins' crib, and Kayla and James were nestled on the mat right at her feet. They were no longer playing, but sitting quietly, snuggled up against each other and their older sister. Both of them looked a little dejected. When James heard the sound of Mom's footsteps, he looked up hopefully and then lowered his head, obviously realizing that Emma had returned alone. "When is Daddy coming back?" Kayla asked bodily. "I don't know, sweetie. I hope it's soon." Only Emma had a thought that should have crossed her mind last night, but hadn't. Apparently, due to too much anxiety gripping the woman. She should have called her husband's parents, his sister, his brother. Maybe they know something? And if they didn't, at least they should be informed of what had happened. As soon as Emma thought of that, she immediately grabbed the phone. Over the next few hours, she called seemingly everyone. Her husband's relatives, his friends, acquaintances, even business associates. No one knew anything, but everyone expressed extreme concern about what had happened. That evening, Edward did not come home again. The next few months were what took Emma from her cherished dream to her worst nightmare. Edward never showed up. His relatives suddenly stopped visiting the family as well, and what's more, they didn't even call. Apparently, they did not care about the woman and her children. The children, in turn, from nice obedient kids, began to turn into uncontrollable monsters. That is, the twins, of course, remained the same, and Mary, though noticeably dejected, but somehow kept herself in control. Only occasionally the girl let her emotions take over reason and snapped, then at her mother, then at her brother and sister. But James and Kayla were as if mad. They didn't listen and broke and smashed everything they saw in front of them. Worse, they even started fighting with each other. More precisely, the older brother constantly bullied his little sister, and she, in turn, was unable to fight back. But she was perfectly able to set up some meanness in secret. Emma understood perfectly well why it was happening, of course. The children had a real shock and had no idea how to deal with it. After all, in addition to the fact that their father had disappeared, all the other relatives had disappeared somewhere. They were used to the fact that the house was noisy, crowded, and cheerful. Besides, the little ones perfectly read the mood of their mother and older sister. But only this understanding did not give Emma an answer to the main question: what to do with all this? In addition to everything else, financial problems began to arise, of which the woman had no idea until then. However, the money in the special family account, to which only she and Edward had access, was gradually beginning to melt away, and there was nowhere for new money to come from. The missing husband didn't work, and therefore didn't get a paycheck. Emma, burdened with children and having neither education nor experience, could not even imagine from which side she should take the question of finding a job. And the expenses, by the way, were enormous, no matter how hard she tried to save money. One evening there was a knock on the door of the house. Emma opened it and found a scowling policeman on the doorstep. After introducing himself in full uniform, he asked permission to enter. Without waiting for an answer, he pushed his way into the hallway and asked, "You're Wilson Emma, right?" "Yeah." Confused, the woman confirmed. "So Wilson Edward, registered at this address and missing 3 months ago, is your husband?" "Yes." Again Emma answered briefly. "We found him," said the policeman. She shrieked with joy, but immediately faltered as she looked at the grim face of the policeman. Slowly, very slowly, as if breaking through an invisible barrier, the meaning of his words came to her. "No," she whispered. "It can't be. Don't tell me what." "I'm sorry, but your husband is probably no longer alive. Of course, we can't be sure it's him. Not until we've conducted an identification procedure. Will you be able to attend, or should we contact his other close relatives?" Emma wanted to say something, but she felt dizzy and the ground seemed to slip away from under her feet. She swayed and grabbed the door jamb with her hand, but it did nothing to help her. After a few seconds, the woman fainted. She still forced herself to come to the lineup, realizing that if she didn't see the body, she wouldn't be able to believe and accept the inevitable. Only after a brief glance at the face, she immediately realized that there was no mistake. Before her, on the cold morgue table, lay her husband, no doubt dead. After the identification, the policeman told her at length what they thought had happened. For some reason, mentioning details that Emma would have preferred to know nothing about. It appeared that her husband had been victimized by some inept hooligans. They had robbed him of his wallet and then realized that he had seen their faces and would be able to point them out to the police, after which her poor Edward had suffered injuries incompatible with life. "Did you capture them?" was all she asked, trying to disengage herself from the detailed description of her husband's injuries. "Not yet," sighed the policeman, "but the investigation is ongoing. I promise you, we will find whoever did this." "Well, find them." Indifferently, the woman thought, but said nothing out loud, realizing how wild it would sound in this situation. Right now, she didn't really care whether the bastards were captured or not. It wouldn't bring her husband back. And she didn't even think about the fact that they might be a danger to someone else. However, as it turned out, this was not the worst ordeal that cruel fate had prepared for her. At least, not the last. She was wrong. Edward's relatives didn't give a damn about her. They all as one hated her fiercely, But before the tragedy, they had smiled hypocritically in her face and cooed at her children. Now they were finally showing their true natures. They told her everything they thought. Over the next week, she found out that they thought she had married Edward solely because he was rich and successful, that she had tied him down with her belly and then kept having children to hold on to. When she realized that Mary would soon grow up and that leverage would be lost to her, of course, they all thought she was no match for Edward. She was from an extremely poor family and an orphan. The only reason she didn't end up in an orphanage was because her maternal grandmother had agreed to take her in. But she was so strict and so driven, the poor girl, that she sometimes thought that she would be better off in an orphanage. For all these revelations could hardly hurt Emma now. The woman was trying to get over her grief. After all, no matter what anyone said, she truly loved her husband. Yes, in addition, she still had to take care of the children and think about how exactly she would now feed and clothe them. Emma married very early, barely 18 years old, and almost immediately afterwards became pregnant with Mary. Edward's salary was more than enough to provide for the whole family, so the woman had no motivation to get an education or look for a job. She saw herself in no other role than that of a caring mother and wife. The entire household was on her shoulders, and this suited both her and her husband. And what to do now she had no idea. Even if she is taken somewhere, for example, a saleswoman, she will have to work literally 24 hours a day, without days off, just to provide her family with everything they need. And who at this time will watch the children, especially the twins? In the summer, Mary could still take care of them, though she wouldn't like it. But then what? However, there was still the inheritance. It would be possible to sell the house and buy a more modest dwelling, maybe even a small apartment in a high-rise. Ideally, in this case, there would still be some money for the first time. And Edward's personal account would probably have some money saved up, which would now go to her. And by the time the savings came to an end, she could probably come up with something. But those plans were not destined to materialize. It turned out that the house they were living in was registered to Edward's parents, so they could forget about selling it. Moreover, Emma's ultimatum demanded that she immediately vacate the premises to which she had no rights, and take your Mary, you've already ruined her. And the little asshole, too, perhaps, and the younger ones will stay with us. We will bring them up ourselves, after all, our grandchildren, Edward's own blood. Her mother-in-law told her. No way, Emma said fiercely. You will not have my children. So where will you go with them? You're going to the garbage dump. That's where you belong, but spare the children. It's none of your business where I go. Emma cut me off. Well, as you know anyway, very soon the guardianship service will take them away from you, and then they will definitely come to us. Threatened her mother-in-law. That's when Emma remembered about her grandmother's old house, or rather her own, because the old lady, despite her bad temper and strained relations with her granddaughter, still left her everything she had as an inheritance. A small plot of land, and at that time not too strong house. It was located in a remote village, which was not easy to reach without a car. Obviously not the best option to move there with children, but Emma had no other options, and this was at least a roof over her head. Mary, of course, would have to be moved to the village school. She couldn't go to the city every day. She won't like it, but she's old enough to understand the necessity of such a step. What? Mary's up in arms. An old wreck in the middle of nowhere and a country school? Are you crazy or what? Don't be rude to your mother, replied Emma, more tired than angry. Or do you prefer the option of sleeping at the station? Just say the word and we'll be right back. No way, Mary snorted. Look, darling, we'll try to think of something. I hope it's just a temporary measure. You've only got 5 months left till the end of the year, and it'll be winter vacation soon, and we'll see what can happen in the meantime. Maybe we can sell the house. All right, the daughter softened. I'll survive somehow. They rode in the train, loaded with suitcases, strollers, and children. Mary held the older one's hands tightly, keeping them from scattering and getting into trouble. Emma had the twins in her arms, sleeping without a care in spite of their less than comfortable position. They were the only ones of the group unaware of the difficult situation they were in, so there was nothing to worry about. The train took about 2 hours to get to the station, and then the family had to take a bus, which, according to the schedule, ran every half hour till late afternoon. Emma remembered very well that in her childhood it was impossible to believe this schedule, but at least at this stage of the journey they were lucky. The old, cramped, gasoline-guzzling bus pulled up to the stop the minute the family and all their luggage reached it. For another 40 minutes they jolted along a bad country road, bouncing on endless bumps, falling into holes, but the most difficult part of the journey was undoubtedly the last one. It was impossible to do it otherwise than on foot, only by private car. No public transportation went directly to the village. They had to walk first along the same country road, and then turn into the forest, then get out into a large field, and then the village they were looking for began very near. All this difficult road took no more than an hour, provided, of course, that the weather was good, and the person walking on it was an adult and physically strong, and moreover light. They had to wade through the snowy debris, and besides, a snowstorm was about to start, and all this with heavy luggage and small children in their arms. But there was nothing to do. They had to go. As long as the path led them along the road, it was still bearable. In the forest, however, in spite of the fact that the path was very wide, it became quite difficult. At this time of year, there were seldom cars, much less pedestrians. Consequently, the whole road was covered with loose snow. Suddenly, when the woman was desperate to break through the snow, she heard the roar of an engine from behind. Turning around, she saw a huge SUV driving slowly but surely along the path. Such a car was not afraid of any obstacles, but despite this, the driver drove quietly and cautiously. But at least there will be a road in the morning, thought Emma, hurriedly pulling aside the children and suitcases. However, and to her surprise, the car slowed down next to them. The driver's side window rolled down and a man about her age or a little older stared at them. His eyes were filled with shock and confusion. "Where are you going in this weather?" he asked. "To the village." Emma replied, "I understand your surprise, but we have very good reasons to go there right now. It's a long story." "I'm sure there are." The man chuckled. "Hop in the car. I think you'll fit, though it'll be a little cramped. I'm on my way to the same place." Emma could not have imagined such a fortunate turn of events. No matter how many times she had walked along this road, no matter how many cars had passed her, she had never had anyone offer her a ride. Somehow, when she saw the car, she hadn't even thought of it as an option. Emma stowed 2 suitcases and 2 strollers in the roomy trunk, and with the middle children and Ethan, settled into the back seat. Mary, on the other hand, carefully took Cindy in her arms and sat next to the driver. When he was sure that everyone was in the car, he stepped on the gas, and the car continued to slowly make its way through the snow. "What are you doing here?" Emma asked. "It's late. My mother lives in this village," the man explained with some annoyance in his voice. "How many times I offered her to move to the city, but she wouldn't go for it. She'd gotten used to her home for many years. It would be hard for her. Then I suggested that she move to a more decent village. To this one. God forbid, that even an ambulance will take 2 hours to get there. No, she doesn't want to. She says she was born here and will die here. The driver sighed heavily. So I go to her when I finish work not too late. Yeah, but it's less often than I'd like. I'm worried about her terribly. She's a perky girl, but she's still old. I understand. Emma said, Well, now it's your turn. It's a long way in this snow. Tell us your long story. We'll consider it a toll. Through the front mirrors, Emma saw him smiling broadly and couldn't help smiling back, then told him everything from the time her husband didn't come home one night to the last ugly fight with Edward's kin. She wasn't even allowed to take most of the children's things, and some things, like the twins' cradle, she wouldn't have been able to drag away with her anyway. Her husband's monetary inheritance, which was her only hope, as it turned out, was to be divided among all his numerous relatives according to his will. Of course, Emma and the children printed a share, but it was a very modest amount, on which they could hardly last even a month. So I was left with only my grandmother's old house. Sadly, she summarized, that's where we're headed, and what to do next. Frankly speaking, I have no idea. Do you happen to know if there are any jobs in the village? Maybe a cleaner at the school or something like that? The driver thought hard, then said, I have an idea. Maybe you'll agree to look after my mom, help her around the house and all that. I won't be stingy on payment. It's really important to me. I'd love to, Emma said. At that moment, they were just approaching the outskirts of the village, and when they asked which plot of land to drop them off at, and heard the answer, the man suddenly laughed out loud and then explained, You will go to the neighboring house for work. Emma was afraid to believe that everything was going so well. However, when they drove up to her grandmother's old house, the good mood that had begun to appear fell below the plinth again. Unpleasant memories piled a heavy stone on her heart, and the sight of the plot did not inspire optimism. The woman, of course, realized that it would look very unkept. After all, no one had come here for many years. However, she hadn't expected this level of neglect at all. The area looked more like a piece of forest that had recently been hit by a hurricane than anything else. A huge fallen tree crisscrossed the entire lot, densely overgrown with weeds, dry stalks visible even from under a meter of snow, but the house was even worse. The old logs were cracked, the window frames were coming off the walls, the glass was broken in several places, and the building itself seemed to be swaying. Maybe it had always been like this, but she'd forgotten about it. She didn't even rule out the possibility that the roof might be cracked, though, of course, she couldn't see it from the street. Thank you. She thanked the driver dejectedly. By the way, what's your name? Edward, he introduced himself. Such coincidences happen, Emma thought in surprise, but she only said her name aloud. Well, you're settling in. His words sounded like mockery, though it was clear that he hadn't planned it at all. And I'll come back tomorrow, and we'll discuss the terms of your work. They said goodbye. With difficulty overcoming various obstacles, Emma and Mary dragged into the house, first the younger children and then the luggage. It was good that the suitcases were heavy but light. The strollers were much heavier. Opening the front door with her old key, Emma looked around warily. The place looked almost exactly as she remembered it. The same bookcases and the same small kitchen connected by a living space, the same dilapidated staircase leading to the second floor. Just from years of neglect, the house was covered in dust and cobwebs, and yes, snow piled up from the broken windows. Leaving the children downstairs, the woman climbed up to the second floor. Despite its appearance, the stairs were quite sturdy. It was much warmer upstairs and completely free of snow. Emma exhaled a sigh of relief. so the roof was fine. Well, it wasn't a resort, but she had expected the worst. The furniture on the second floor included her old crib and another bookcase, and there was a folded crib in the corner. She made sure that its mechanism, though a little rusty, was in good working order, so it could well be used as a bed. In addition to clothes and some of the children's things, Emma had managed to take with her a set of linens, which she now used to make the bed. Designed for a giant double bed, it was too big, but the woman thought it was no big deal. If it had been the opposite, too small, it would have been much worse. Emma put the children upstairs for the night. Mary and Kayla took the cot. James got the crib. The twins only had to be put in the stroller, one for two, because they refused to fall asleep separately. The woman herself stayed downstairs. Unlike everyone else, she couldn't afford to fall asleep. She had too much to do. The first thing Emma did was to heat the stove, and an hour later it warmed the small house all over, and it was quite possible to be inside without outer clothing, at least on the second floor. The snow that had piled up immediately began to melt. The woman did her best to sweep it out the door and then wipe up the remaining wet spots with an old rag. Then she tackled the windows. Luckily, there were plenty of unwanted rags and some dry cardboard boxes in the house. It allowed her to make temporary inserts to replace the broken windows and to plug all the cracks properly. Not too reliable, but there were no other options now anyway. Emma spent the rest of the night cleaning, scrubbing the floors, dusting, removing cobwebs. Occasionally, she went up to see if the children were all right. By morning, the house looked lively, though not very cozy, and the woman was so exhausted that she didn't notice how she fell asleep in the old chair by the stove. Mary woke her up when she came down to the first floor, rattling something and grumbling noisily to herself. Emma opened her eyes and was surprised to realize that her daughter was trying to cook porridge on the stove and heat feeding bottles for the twins at the same time. Of course, she wasn't used to it, but she was not very good at it. "Oops," she said, turning around. "Sorry, Mom didn't want to wake you up. I thought I'd make breakfast myself." "You didn't wake me up." Emma lied with a slight smile. "Thanks for your help, but let me show you how to do it." They were so engrossed in the cooking process that they didn't immediately notice the insistent knock at the door. It was Edward, as promised, coming to discuss the terms of employment. The woman with him was elderly, but quite vigorous. "Meet Clara, my mother," he said. "And this is Emma. I figured as much." The younger woman smiled. "Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you," the old woman replied. However, neither her gaze nor her voice expressed the slightest bit of warmth. Either she didn't trust Emma, which was understandable, or maybe she just wasn't thrilled with her son's idea of hiring her a nanny. It was immediately clear that it would not be easy to find a common language with her ward, and so their life in the countryside went on. Mary was also getting used to the new school. Emma, in her spare time, tried to put her grandmother's old house in some kind of order, and Edward helped her. Without listening to any objections, he hired a team of workers who put in the broken glass, properly caulked the cracks, and carried out a light cosmetic repair of the room. "Look, it's no problem for me," he said. "I just can't stand to see kids living in such horrible conditions." "Thank you," Emma answered him, embarrassed. "Don't be grateful, and don't think you owe me anything, nothing like that." Clara had been really hard to deal with at first, nagging Emma and rejecting any help she offered. Even if it was really difficult to cope with the case, which she took up on her own, the mother of many children, such behavior slightly pissed her off. What a mean old woman! Does not realize that this is her job. And she does not pester her willingly. It's her duty, Or maybe she really doesn't understand. Emma thought about it. She had a feeling that there was some strange reticence between them that prevented them from building normal communication. And so, once again, when the old woman almost forcefully rushed to take away her broom, the woman could not stand it. "Clara, what are you really doing? It's really hard for you to bend over. Why not let someone help you? Especially since your son pays me good money for it. You're making me feel very uncomfortable. How would I feel if I had a babysitter? No one thought of that. I'm not a frail old woman, and I'm not completely out of my mind to be under 24-hour surveillance. Not round the clock." Emma corrected her curtly. "Don't you realize Edward is worried about you? No one thinks you can't handle things on your own. He just wants to make things easier for you, and I think he thinks you're just plain bored here alone. Then he should come more often." Clara muttered, not as confidently as before. "I'm sure he comes as often as he can." "I see." Clara sighed, sinking tiredly into the chair. "I'm sorry, Emma. I shouldn't have thrown myself at you. I realize with my mind that you and my son only wish me well, but I can't help it. I keep thinking that I'm being mistaken for some kind of a woman." The old woman didn't finish. Emma knew exactly what she meant. And then a wonderful idea came into her head, an idea to reconcile her grandmother with the help she was giving her and to relieve her loneliness. Somehow she was sure Edward wouldn't object to such a thing. "Listen, Clara," she began softly. "Do you like children? Who doesn't?" The old woman replied, "Then I can offer you this variant of our further interaction. I will come to you and do all the housework, as a matter of fact, and should. You will contact me if you have even the slightest difficulty. But I will also bring my children to you and ask you to watch them. How does that sound?" Clara first looked at Emma with a puzzled look and then smiled broadly. It was clear that this option completely suited the old woman. After all, it seemed that they were helping each other in a completely reciprocal way, and she would no longer feel completely old and infirm. The proposed scheme worked perfectly. Clara treated Emma's children as if they were her own grandchildren, which she never had, but apparently wanted very much. Kayla and James, under her watchful eye, suddenly stopped their pranks and became about as sweet and obedient children as they had been before. Even the twins, who were not particularly fond of strangers, behaved quite calmly in her presence, letting her feed and change their clothes. The old woman had a real talent for parenting. "How I missed it," she said dreamily one day. "It's been so many years since I've been close to children." "You mean Edward's childhood?" Emma inquired. "Not only that. I used to work in a school as an elementary school teacher." "Why did you leave? Did it get hard?" Emma asked worriedly. "It wasn't hard." The old woman waved the question away. "I was kicked out. The director changed and immediately began, so to speak, to reshuffle the staff. He said that the elderly should rest, and the school should be taught by the young and active. Suspecting that my place was very necessary to his young and active mistress. That's quite a story." "I sympathize." "Oh, well, at least now I can babysit yours. James has an amazing aptitude for math. He should be in a special class. Only here in the village, though, there aren't any." So slowly Emma and her children settled in the village. Mary, at first shunned by the local children, in the spring was already in full swing with her new friends. James and Kayla, apparently, began to consider Clara their own grandmother, and she did not object. Soon it was time to do the planting. Emma simply caught fire with the idea of organizing a real vegetable garden on her plot. The village men gladly helped their new neighbor in clearing the plot. "It's been bothering us for a long time. One of them explained when they came to offer their help. All over the village everything is clean and beautiful, and only here it is desolate. So, mistress, we are very glad that you came and decided to take care of the plot. The most difficult, as expected, was a huge tree that had fallen across the territory. The men, of course, led in a chainsaw and removed it piece by piece. But there was still a root adjacent to the house. Everyone was afraid that some outgrowths would not go further to the foundation. Then the removal of this part could lead to some unpleasant destruction. Eventually, after conferring, Emma's volunteer helpers came to some sort of solution. She didn't have much of a view of what exactly they were doing there, as she was busy destroying the weeds at the other end of the plot. She was distracted from this fascinating endeavor by a loud, annoyed shout from the entrance to the house. Running over, the woman found that the root had been pulled out. It hadn't caused much damage, but the porch was clearly beyond repair. With mild irritation, Emma thought she would have to make a new one. At the same moment, however, she was glad that this unfortunate incident was the only one. And then she noticed among the wooden debris some suspicious gleam. The woman bent down and looked closely and saw a small key. At first she thought it had been dropped by one of the workers, but no one could identify her find. And she soon realized that the key, old and dirty with soil, had probably been lying under the porch for years. Without realizing why, she slipped it into her jeans pocket and quickly forgot about the incident. Her thoughts were occupied with something else entirely. After all, she had not only her own vegetable garden on her shoulders, but also the neighbors', which of course looked much more decent, but still required quite a decent amount of work. Spring flew by without anyone noticing, and June came. Mary was very proud of herself. She managed to finish the 10th grade with straight A's. Emma had a new concern. She had to get James to school, who was to start studying in the 1st grade in September. Everything would be all right, but Clara insisted that his math talents should not be buried in the ground. She didn't like the idea of such a gifted boy going to an ordinary rural school. She suggested a boarding school for gifted children as an alternative. "Oh my God!" Emma exclaimed every time she made that suggestion. He wouldn't even be 7 in September, so how could he be alone, surrounded by strangers? But he'll come for vacations, and weekends too. I'm sure we can arrange for my son to bring him here, and then take him to school. Still, 5 days a week in a completely unfamiliar environment with strangers, he'll think we've abandoned him, that no one wants him here. Nonsense. That's what Clara said. All the children there are about the same age, and almost no one has any problems, especially not such an independent boy as James. But he will miss his sister, and Kayla will miss him too. And how is it so fundamentally different from going to a regular school? He'll have classes there too, where no one will let her go. Kids have to get used to not being together all the time. After all, Emma, you seem to forget that I'm a professional teacher and understand something about child psychology. Emma knew that there was a lot of truth in what she said, and yet she was incredibly scared to send her child away so early, even though she knew very well that this boarding school was one of the best schools in the city, and she could imagine the difficulties many people had to go through to get their children there. She had a unique chance to send James to school without making any effort at all. Clara, who still had some connections, had already arranged for him to be accepted if he passed the entrance exam. However, not only she, but even Emma herself, had no doubts about that. The exams were in August, so they had 2 months to think it over. So each time, Emma avoided the discussion under a plausible pretext, hoping that somehow, magically, a compromise solution would be found that would suit everyone. This problem, however, was firmly planted in her mind. Sometimes she would toss and turn in bed for long periods of time, unable to sleep. On such nights, Emma's thoughts wandered in circles, but never led her to a decision. And that's exactly what happened on that fateful day, which once again changed her family's life dramatically. When the woman was lying in bed, suffering from insomnia, she suddenly thought she heard a strange sound, like the crackling of fire. At first, she paid no attention to it, thinking it must be the stove. Despite the onset of summer, the nights were still chilly, and it wasn't too comfortable to sleep in the house without her. Emma was even almost able to fall asleep, lulled to sleep by these sounds that seemed quite pleasant, but after a minute she jumped up abruptly on the bed. For some time she sat in some strange tension, herself, not really understanding what was causing it. Then at last it came to her. The sound of the burning fire was clearly not coming from the stove. She had long ago gotten used to that slight crackling sound and had accepted it simply as background noise. So why should she pay attention to it all of a sudden? No, there was clearly something wrong here. Emma listened and realized the sound was coming from the wrong side of the stove. What's more, it was much louder and growing louder by the minute. There was some kind of clattering and whistling mixed in with the fiery interval. Jumping up from the bed, Emma looked around the room. It was quiet, no sign of fire. She went up to the second floor to the children, all of whom were sleeping peacefully, not noticing anything unusual. Nothing was obviously burning here either. And then Emma's gaze fell on the window. For the first moment she froze, startled, then she snapped out of her seat and rushed downstairs, pulling on her jacket and grabbing her phone from the table. In the yard, she dashed to the well and grabbed a bucket of water. So, with the heavy bucket in one hand and the other dialing the fire department's number on the phone, she rushed to the Clara house, which was burning as if it were made of dry straw. As soon as she was answered, the woman mouthed the address into the receiver and disconnected. Tucking the phone into her jacket pocket, she began pouring water on the burning house, then rushed to the well and as quickly as she could, drew another bucket. But where was it? The fire was already burning too much to be extinguished in that way. Emma tried to get through the fire to get inside the house, but she could not do so. The flames were burning intolerably and were everywhere. The windows and doors were jammed, and she could not open them. But she could see through the glass that the fire was already inside. She did not understand why Clara herself did not take any steps to save herself, did not scream, did not try to get out of the house. Maybe she wasn't there at all. A comforting thought flashed through her mind. Had she stayed the night at one of her girlfriend's houses or something? Soon other neighbors began to appear near the house, who also noticed something wrong. Someone's strong hands pulled Emma away from the door, which she was still trying to open, not realizing that her jacket was on fire. Men ran around the building, some with buckets and some with fire extinguishers, but all their efforts were in vain. The fire seemed to be getting even hotter, and now they were extinguishing not even the house itself, but the space around it. It was clear to everyone that they would not be able to save the building on their own. Emma, exhausted, sat on the ground. She didn't even feel the pain from the burns she had received, and there was only one thought in her head: if only she were not at home, if only she were not at home, if only she were not at home, if only she were not at home. "Look out!" someone shouted. And that's when the fire department arrived. I wish she wasn't inside. That was Emma's last thought before she lost consciousness. When she woke up, she felt that she was lying on something soft, something pleasantly cold on her forehead. She reached out and gently touched the object. Apparently, someone had placed a compress of cool water-soaked cloth on her head. Trying not to throw it off, the woman looked around and realized she was in her own home. Thank God you're awake." She heard a familiar voice. Turning at the sound, she saw Edward sitting beside her bed. His face expressed decidedly nothing, but the woman noticed how red and swollen his eyes were. It looked like the man had been crying. She turned cold. A burned-down house was certainly very unpleasant, but hardly the kind of incident that could bring a grown man to tears. "Clara?" I asked, afraid to hear the answer. Edward made a strange sound, as if sobbing, but immediately pulled himself together. "Dead." In a husky voice, he said. "Firemen dug up the body. Looks like she was asleep when it happened. Her now. Anyway, she's being examined by a pathologist, but the firemen are sure she didn't, at least. Anyway, she didn't die from the fire. She suffocated. It's less agonizing after all." She felt tears running down her cheeks. In the short time they'd known each other, she'd grown to love that perky old woman. Not to mention how upset the children, who considered her almost their own grandmother, would be. "How are you feeling?" Edward asked. "Me?" She didn't understand. "Yeah, well, you were hurt too. Bad burns, heat stroke." That's what the paramedics said. They even wanted to take you to the hospital. But I thought if you woke up there, you'd go crazy worrying about the kids. The neighbors say you tried to break down the doors and break in despite the fire, and the fire department says that if you had succeeded, they would have found 2 bodies instead of 1. And the children? She didn't feel the pain of the burns, though she supposed she should have, but it was hard to speak. The phrases came out short, and her voice sounded strangely stilted somehow, as if she'd blown it off. Perhaps she had, though the woman didn't remember yelling anything. Upstairs, Mary was now trying to get the younger ones back into bed. They all woke up when they heard you screaming and, of course, freaked out when they realized what was happening. "My screams! You don't remember? You were not only breaking into the house, you were screaming for help. In fact, it wasn't even the fire that woke up a lot of the neighbors. It was you." "Too late," Emma muttered bitterly. "Don't you dare blame yourself for this." Edward said harshly, "The only one to blame here is the one who set the fire." "Arson?" His eyes widened. "That's the main theory so far. There's nothing else that could have caused the house to go up in flames. Our heating was all electric, and Mom wasn't in the habit of leaving the stove on. And the fire department says that the fire, from what they saw, was not a typical domestic blaze." "Yeah, well, that's a police matter. You don't have to worry about that." Emma felt herself falling back into sleep. She wanted to ask something else, but her tongue wouldn't move and her eyelids were slipping. After a few minutes, the woman realized that she was unable to fight it any longer and lost consciousness again. 3 days later, Emma fully recovered. Of course, the burns still reminded of themselves, but otherwise everything was fine, except for the extremely depressed state. On the 3rd day, she and her children were going to the funeral, but the woman found it hard to concentrate on anything, and everything she did fell out of her hands. The children, extremely saddened by Slav's death, were once again behaving disgustingly. Even the twins, who were too young to realize what had happened, cried incessantly. And just as they were about to leave, Ethan pooped his pants. "Mary, change his diaper, please." Helplessly, Emma asked, "Why do I have to clean up after him?" Mary asked in a deliberately squeaky voice, her lips pressed together. "You don't have to, honey. I just asked you to help because I can't do it myself. You shouldn't have had so many kids if you couldn't handle it," Mary muttered. But Emma ignored the jab, and the girl sighed heavily and got down to business. Finally, everything was ready, and the family left the house. Edward was waiting for them at the gate in his car. He said that he would drive them to the funeral, not wanting to hear any objections. Emma, however, was too powerless to argue seriously with him on the subject. As soon as they arrived at the cemetery, Emma and Mary got out of the car, and a man in a policeman's uniform, who until that moment had been standing quietly near the fence, came toward them. As he approached, he showed the woman his ID and sternly inquired, "Are you Wilson Emma?" "Yeah." Confused, Emma confirmed. "Emma, you're under arrest on suspicion of willful arson, damage to property, and death." "What?" Edward and Mary exclaimed indignantly. "You must come with me to the police station immediately." Without paying attention to them, the policeman continued, "This is some kind of stupid misunderstanding." Edward continued to argue with him. "Man, if you continue to interfere with the work of the police, I will arrest you too." The policeman threatened him. "Edward, don't." Emma suddenly spoke up. "Please look after my children." Of course he promised. For some reason, Emma thought the policeman would lead her to some nearby station on foot. Instead, he put her in the back seat of the police car, not forgetting to handcuff her. They drove for at least 40 minutes, as far as the woman could tell, to the other side of town. At the police station, she was locked in a cage. It was hard to call this room differently. Wherever you looked from all sides, she was surrounded by bars. The size of the room was about 2 by 2 meters, and all of its furniture consisted of a rickety and hard stool, to sit down on which she did not dare to sit. She did not know how long it was before a scowling policeman, not the one who had brought her here, but some other one, opened the door of her cell and led her down some long, gloomy corridors to an interrogation room. There was a table where another man sat, a chair across from it, on which Emma's escort sat, pushing her roughly before removing himself. "Emma Wilson?" clarified the investigator. She nodded. He made a notation in his notebook. "Emma, you are being questioned in a case of willful injury to life, with aggravating circumstances. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to a phone call as well as the protection of an attorney. If for some reason you do not want to hire one, you will be provided with a public defender. I must also warn you that our conversation is being recorded. Is that clear to you?" Emma nodded again. "Well, good, then let's get started. Tell me what you did on the night of June 3rd through June 4th. She tried to describe the events of that terrible night in as much detail as possible. How she couldn't sleep, how she heard a suspicious noise and couldn't figure out what it was for a long time, how she finally realized that something was burning somewhere. She rushed to check the children's room and saw the fire in the window as she called the firemen and ran to Clara's house. But what happened next, she couldn't even remember. She must have been too shocked. The investigator, however, was not satisfied. He asked her endless questions, trying to get all the information he could out of her. She honestly tried to answer them, but she realized how unconvincing her words sounded. "Well, okay." The investigator stretched out, abruptly changing the topic of conversation. "As I understand, you and the deceased were close. Yes, you could say that." Emma replied. "Explain," he demanded. She went on again, recounting the circumstances of their acquaintance, the contract she had made with Edward. Then she tried to explain how it had come about that Clara had taken care of her children and had practically replaced their grandmother. "You cooked at her house, didn't you?" The investigator asked, as if again out of turn. "Did you have access to food?" "Well, yes." Emma said. "Could anyone other than you and your children have had access to the food in Clara's house?" "Edward probably. He brought groceries to his mother." "Maybe someone else. She often had visitors, but I can't say for sure. The investigator looked at her, studying her, and then sighed heavily. You see, here's the thing. Most likely, she couldn't get out of the fire because she was sleeping very soundly and just didn't know what was going on. Forensics found a large dose of sleeping pills in her bloodstream. And you think, Emma said with horror in her voice, that I slipped it into her system. Alas, we see no other options. We could, of course, thank Edward, but he has an airtight alibi. And don't look at me with such judgment. He's her son. That doesn't mean anything. Did you know that most often the perpetrator is someone close to the deceased? Emma shook her head, then said, Look, why would I hurt her? She was babysitting my kids, and I was getting the money I needed. Being her nurse and housekeeper all in one. Yeah, it's really messed up, but personally, I don't think you thought she was gonna die. Not everyone on this case agrees with me, but I still don't think you'd do arson. You probably slipped the old lady sleeping pills for some more innocuous purpose, maybe not even criminal, but you overdosed her. And you picked a very bad day to do it. That's what your behavior at the fire suggests to me. Witnesses say you almost burned yourself trying to get into a burning house. But why? Was it because you knew that Clara was asleep inside and couldn't get out on her own? Tell me the truth, Emma. I promise it will count for something in court. Emma exhaled sharply. Now she understood what the investigator wanted. He's being a good cop, pretending to be on her side, wanting her to confess that she did slip sleeping pills, and if she does, he'll go on to find out if she could have set the house on fire too. Purely by accident, of course. I want a lawyer, she said sharply. Well, that's your right. The investigator sounded disappointed. The lawyer for Emma was hired by Edward, who had all sorts of connections for every occasion. He had managed to get the woman released on her own recognizance, based on physical evidence and witness testimony. She was still a suspect, but the police had no evidence against her, only speculation. Emma hated to go back to the village. Yes, in the few months she had spent there, she had grown to love the place. But now it was soaked with the memories of the terrible incident. The woman, however, was not so much worried for herself as for the children. It is unlikely that now they will be cozy and quiet in their old home. Why don't you stay with me for a while? Edward suddenly suggested it. No, it would be awkward. Emma hesitated. It's not inconvenient at all. I live in a rather spacious apartment where I appear only once every 3 days. You won't make me uncomfortable there. After some thought, Emma agreed to his proposal. It was only when she arrived at Edward's house that she realized that he was obviously being modest. His rather spacious apartment had 2 floors and a dozen rooms. Each floor had its own front door, so that the inhabitants of the first and second tier could never meet. It used to be 2 separate apartments, Edward explained. But I'd always wanted a 2-story wonder like this, so I bought both and remodeled them. I've been thinking about getting my mom in here. Emma and the kids are comfortable on the 2nd floor. However, no one forbade them to go down to the 1st floor, but for some reason everyone was shy. Even though Edward hadn't lied, he was rarely at home, either working or doing something else. Periodically, her lawyer visited her to update her on the progress of the investigation. However, he had no particular news on the matter. The investigation still had no solid evidence against the main suspect, no new versions. The police were treading water. But one day, the lawyer appeared on the doorstep of Edward's apartment in a highly agitated state, and Emma immediately realized that the case had finally moved on. They searched the crime scene again, the lawyer said. For the 5th time, I think. But now they found something new? Emma guessed. Before they were only looking upstairs, but now they decided to check the foundation. And apparently, they found the source of the fire. They did. Exactly. There's a whole secret room deep in the house on the basement level. Apparently, that's what they tried to burn, doused it with gasoline and set it on fire. The fire then spread to the house. The police even suspect that the criminals didn't plan it. They just weren't too smart. But it was a waste. The room is practically the only thing that survived. There is a very strong metal door, and the whole room, apparently, made of heat-resistant materials. Apparently? Emma raised an eyebrow. Well, it's not clear yet. We couldn't get into the room. The door is very strong, and the lock is very complicated. We could, of course, use more drastic measures, but the police are afraid that they might damage some important evidence. There's no need for such measures. Emma said abruptly. The lawyer looked at her with bewilderment, and without explaining anything, she rushed to her room and dug among the hangings of the old jeans she had once worn in the vegetable garden. Frantically rummaging through all the pockets, and she exhaled with relief. Somehow, the item she was looking for hadn't gotten lost among the things. "Let him try this key first," she said, holding it out to the lawyer. Not a sure thing, of course, but I don't rule out that it might fit. The lawyer continued to look at her, not understanding, even with some suspicion. Emma sighed and told him about how the workmen had broken the porch of her house trying to pull a malignant blighted tree root out of the ground, and how an old key was found in the wreckage of the porch. "I thought at the time that it was from some old chest or something," she explained, "and that my grandmother had lost it, and the chest had been opened and thrown away, or the lock had been changed. Maybe that's true, but I think that Clara might have given it to her for safekeeping, and she hid it under the porch, or even, who knows, maybe Clara herself hid it secretly. Such an option cannot be excluded," thoughtfully said the lawyer. "It sounds quite logical, especially since the room is obviously stored something that was not intended for other people's eyes. Thank you. I'll pass it on to the police. Keep me informed." Emma asked. "I will." With a slight smile, the man replied and disappeared. A week passed, followed by another, and the lawyer didn't even call. Emma was a little worried, but for some reason she didn't dare to call him herself. After all, he's a busy man. If he doesn't show up, he probably doesn't have any news on the case. Or if he did, but he had no right to talk about it. Besides, her mind was increasingly occupied with other things, like the fact that little Kayla had suddenly started calling Edward Daddy. Unlike her older brother and sister, she hardly remembered her real father, so it wasn't too surprising. Much stranger was the fact that James soon adopted the habit from her sister, but Mary persisted in calling him Uncle Edward. The twins, because of their age, had so far remained completely neutral in the matter. None of them had yet uttered their first word, though both of them were already crawling and even trying to walk. Edward himself, however, did not object to such treatment. On the contrary, he seemed to like it. He spent quite a lot of time with the children. Every time he came home, he brought each of them a present, and he always guessed who would like what. She was even beginning to catch herself feeling a different kind of sympathy for Edward than she had before. More and more often it occurred to her that he might actually make a good father for her children. She was afraid of that feeling, however, and tried hard not to let it fester. After all, she had lost her husband only a year ago. Was it decent to look at another man after such a short time? But she couldn't fool herself. Often Emma caught herself looking at his strong arms, his broad shoulders, or the aristocratic features of his face turned toward her in profile when he wasn't looking. As soon as she noticed it, she looked away. Sometimes it seemed to her that Edward knew exactly what was going on at such moments. More than that he liked it, and that he was just as discreetly scrutinizing her as he thought no one was looking at him, but neither of them dared to make the next move. Perhaps it was simply too soon for that. The lawyer didn't show up until a month later. He was as bright as a Christmas tree and seemed eager to share his findings. However, when Emma opened the door for him, the first thing he asked was whether Edward was home. Not yet, but he should be within a couple of hours. Well then, if you don't mind, I'd prefer to wait for him. It's a long story that involves both of you, so I don't want to tell it twice. Right now, I can only tell you that the case is closed and all charges against you have been dropped. Really? Emma exclaimed happily. That's right, confirmed the satisfied lawyer. When Edward returned home, he found the two men in the kitchen. They were sitting at the table and drinking tea peacefully, chatting about some nonsense. When they saw him, however, they both jumped up and practically demanded that he change his clothes and join their company. Emma was panting with curiosity, and the lawyer with the desire to tell everything as soon as possible. Finally, when the landlord sat down at the kitchen table and was handed a mug of hot tea, the lawyer took a big sip from his mug and began his story. The longer he spoke, the more implausible the story seemed to everyone present. Nevertheless, every word he said was pure truth. And to begin with, perhaps, it is necessary to start with the fact that your key, Emma, perfectly matched the lock on the door. In fact, when the experts examined it, they had no doubts about it. They opened the door with all possible precautions. Nobody knew what might be inside. And when they opened it, at first they couldn't believe their eyes. The room was completely empty. Only a careful search in some dusty corner found a box, and in it documents. That's when the police had a new prime suspect. You'll never guess who. The headmaster of the village school? Unexpectedly, even to herself, Emma asked, "Exactly." The lawyer stared at her in amazement. "How did you guess?" Clara didn't like him. She suspected that he had thrown her out of her job on the pretext of her age in order to put his young mistress in her place. And she was quite right, chuckled the lawyer. I would even say that she didn't suspect it, but knew about it. The documents found in the box prove it, as well as the fact that the principal was dirty. He took money from students and parents for A's in exams and from teachers to cover up some of their sins. But listen to this, the police started digging into this principal. He didn't personally, after all, crawl under the house with a can of gasoline. Besides, it's unlikely he could have slipped her sleeping pills. She wouldn't have let him in. So he had at least one accomplice. A mistress? Edward asked, and her too. The lawyer nodded. Her role was to slip him sleeping pills. She came to Clara as if just to talk to her, and at first she didn't want to let her in, but then decided that nothing bad would come of it. She poured her some tea and decided to have a drink herself. And that's when, as you can imagine, the first act of this tragedy took place. The girl told the police during the interrogation and immediately gave up her lover when she felt that she was facing a very serious sentence for complicity. She swears, by the way, that she knew nothing about the arson. She thought the director's accomplices would just sneak into the house, find and take the documents, and that would be it. Honestly, I believe her. Well, she doesn't even look like an accomplice to something that serious. However, it's up to the court to decide how guilty she is, but more on that later. It turns out that this director has a second job. He is the head of some criminal group and sent some of his friends to the case, claims that the arson was not planned, and they really only had to take the documents. And these fools couldn't open the lock, so they decided to just burn the whole basement down. Well, this one's lying. Emma was convinced. Yes, he is. The lawyer objected. The police dug up so much on him that it doesn't matter whether it's more arson or less arson. In any case, he'll get a decent sentence. He's got a whole bunch of crimes on him. You can't imagine how many cases were closed at once, but the most interesting thing. He stopped and looked at Emma strangely, then continued. However, under the circumstances, it's probably not the best choice of words. I apologize. Anyway, his men are to blame for your husband's death. Emma shrieked in surprise, then covered her mouth with her palm. After a few seconds, she regained the power of speech, but the police said that they were acting as some unskilled criminals who didn't intend to harm him, but were just frightened, that's why. Yeah, they went to a lot of trouble to make the police think that, but it was the opposite. It was just a cover-up. But why? Emma asked. Edward had always been an honest businessman, never getting involved in any dubious ventures. What could he have done to cross them? The lawyer sighed. He had crossed them, but not them. They were only the executors, not the customers. Well, that's the unpleasant part. Apparently, there were at least 6 people involved. Emma remained silent and stared at the lawyer in horror. She guessed what he would say in the next moment. They were his parents, his brother, 2 sisters, and his maternal uncle. Perhaps some other relatives, but that could not be ascertained for sure. Motive, however. Emma sighed. She understood exactly what the motive might have been. They all hated not only the homeless orphan, but also their own son, brother, nephew, who had brought her into their family, and in this terrible way had decided to take revenge on him and her at the same time. There was, besides personal animosity, also an inheritance. Finished the lawyer. Inheritance? Emma didn't understand, but there was a small amount of money, which, some of it went to me, but nothing else. The house belonged to his parents. If they wanted it so badly, they could just kick us all out without resorting to such measures, couldn't they? Not at all, objected the lawyer. The house belonged entirely to him, and the will should have left it to you. The documents you were shown were not real. There was a long silence in the room, and the lawyer was the first to break it. Digging into his briefcase, he pulled out some documents and handed them to Emma. This is yours. It confirms ownership of the house. You may return there at any time or otherwise dispose of it as you see fit. If you'll excuse me, my wife's waiting for me at home. In principle, everything I wanted to tell you. If you have any questions or need my services again, call me. He dressed and left the apartment, and Emma and Edward sat silently at the table for a long time, digesting what they had heard. Finally, without saying a word, the man placed his palm on hers. She turned her head and smiled warmly at him. Who would have thought they would take the next step towards each other under such strange circumstances? Emma wanted nothing to do with either her late husband's house or the one she had inherited from her grandmother. She sold both and used the proceeds to buy a spacious apartment in the city, which she intended to rent out. The remaining money went to various bank deposits, providing a stable future for the woman and her children. In the 11th grade, Mary went to her old school and graduated with a gold medal. Apparently, the events that took place had a strong impact on her choice of life path. The girl resolutely told her mother that she was going to go to law school to then go to work in the police. Emma, however, was not going to oppose her. James was sent to the same math boarding school, which looked for him Clara. But now that they lived in the city, he could go there as if he were going to a normal school after school, and when he returned home, the rules did not forbid it. On the contrary, the administration was only too happy not to have to find a place for him in the dormitory. Emma and Edward married the year Mary successfully entered the law faculty of one of the capital's universities. They were very worried about how the girl would take the news, but to everyone's surprise, she did not object and was not even surprised to receive an invitation to the wedding. Mary spends all her vacations in the house of her mother and her new husband, and they are waiting for another, now a common child.